Welcome to Fanfiction Audiobook. Page 20. Call me Lex. You saved my life, Clark. Lex Luthor was dressed in an expensive silver grey suit. He looked young and had an elite and capable demeanor. Only a hint of the frivolity and arrogance of a rich second generation remained between his brows. At this time, he was not yet the cold and steady billionaire and ambitious man he would become in the future. Even if you refuse my gift, I don't want you to become too distant. Clark readily agreed and chuckled. What are you doing here, Lex? He felt a certain fondness for Lex, who had given him a pickup truck as a thank you gift. Why can't I be here? Do you think I should spend all my time in nightclubs, luxury stores, and sports car dealerships, constantly spending money like water and partying? Lex Luthor asked in a humorous reply. Stop joking, Clark. Can't I go for a walk if I'm feeling a little down? Even a billionaire's heir can come to the countryside for a stroll like an ordinary person, wander around the market, buy some hot dogs and fruit, and try to cheer himself up. David raised an eyebrow and said calmly. Isn't the vast, green golf course of the metropolitan area enough to relieve your boredom? Taking a walk in the countryside, we bumped into each other by chance and had a pleasant conversation. How delightful! Clark had a vague feeling that his younger brother didn't seem to like Lex Luthor, and he was a little puzzled. But he felt a little guilty towards Luthor, in addition to some goodwill towards him. When he returned the pickup truck to Luthor Manor last time, he chatted with Lex Luthor for a few minutes. When asked about Lex Luthor's baldness, he said it was because more than 10 years ago, his father brought him to this small town to inspect a fertilizer plant, where they encountered a meteor shower. After being exposed to the radiation from the meteor shower, he lost all his hair. Although I was scorned by my father and ostracized by my classmates who thought I was a freak because of this, it doesn't matter. It taught me a lot, such as how being alone helps with thinking. Cattle and sheep travel in herds, while wild beasts often roam alone. Clark still remembered Luthor's words, which, though spoken with a nonchalant and contemptuous air, clearly showed that he hadn't completely let go of the past. Who is this? My brother, David, Clark introduced. Your brother? Hello, David. Luthor glanced at David, greeted him, and sighed with a gloomy expression. The golf club in the metropolitan area is great, but I don't want to go back there for the time being. Before I escape being the laughingstock of everyone. What's wrong, Lex? My father believed that the offspring of lions should be brave and diligent. He spoke with a self-deprecating tone. Perhaps because I had reached an age where I had not yet produced any results that would satisfy him, he exiled me to this small town to manage the town's fertilizer plant. The Luthor Group's assets are spread throughout the United States, especially in metropolitan areas where its presence can be seen in almost every aspect of life, from food and clothing to housing and transportation. This is not the way to cultivate a successor for a large corporation. Instead, they should be transferred away from the core of the corporation, which is fraught with complex affairs, and put in charge of a small fertilizer plant in a remote town. Many people in the upper echelons of the metropolis have heard how spoiled the Luthor family's son has been since childhood. His father had spent enough money to build several newspapers and prisons from scratch to keep him out of the news and jail for those deeds. Now, realizing he was hopeless, the shrewd and cold-blooded old bat, Lionel Luthor, finally gave up on him. If you manage the fertilizer plant well, your father will probably let you go back sooner or later. When Luthor mentioned his childhood experience of being neglected and exiled by his father, Clark's expression shifted slightly, and he offered words of comfort. I heard that your father only has one son, you. Perhaps, but I think it's better to run a fertilizer plant whose potential is already predictable. Why not start a new track? Luthor composed himself and smiled. Modern car glass originated from a failed chemical experiment, and Coca-Cola, found all over the world, can be traced back to a doctor's attempt to create a headache-relieving syrup. Clark, David, Do you know how many huge business opportunities started out as inconspicuous, like seeds buried in the soil, but were later discovered, watered and nurtured by those with a keen eye, and grew into towering trees that countless people look up to? He spoke eloquently to the two of them, as if he were recounting his ambitions and goals. So you came to the countryside to look for seeds? Clark joked. Have you found the seed, Luther? David also said something, slowly. Not yet, but whatever you're looking for, the most important thing is patience, isn't it? Their eyes met, and Luther chuckled suavely. It must be said that, putting aside his unknown spoiled brat deeds, Luther received a good upbringing from a young age. His manners and demeanor were refined, making people feel comfortable and leaving a good impression on them. They could have a pleasant conversation with him. Oh? Really? A cold glint flashed in David's eyes. He felt that Luther believed he had found the seed and was now in the process of digging it up. That seed is the one who was hit head-on by an out-of-control sports car traveling at over 200 miles per hour, crashed through the concrete railing of a bridge, and plunged into the river, yet remained unharmed. Clark. Today might just be the beginning of their investigation. Clark, David, you need to go back and get some more fruit. Jonathan and Martha returned with joy on their faces after successfully closing a deal. A customer who is throwing a party has taken a liking to our fresh fruit, but we don't have enough fruit right now. David and Clark stood up, and Clark introduced Luther to his parents. Mr. Kent, Mrs. Kent, it's a pleasure to meet you. Lex Luthor extended his hand in a friendly and warm manner. Jonathan paused, shook his hand politely, and then turned to his two sons. You need to hurry up, don't keep the customers waiting. He didn't seem to want to talk to Lex Luthor at all. Luthor still wore a bright smile that revealed his white teeth, but it seemed to have become slightly stiff. Okay, father. David smiled, agreed to Clark's request, and left. It seems my father doesn't like Lex Luthor. On the way out of the market, Clark asked in confusion. My father's animosity toward the Luthor family has a long history. Before the Luthor Group acquired a large amount of land through various means and built the fertilizer plant, the river flowing through the town near the plant hadn't yet turned green, grass still grew along its banks, and the soil wasn't yet grayish-black and smelly. David sneered. Now, an indelible scar has appeared on the map of the town. But that wasn't Lex's fault. Clark felt he couldn't implicate Lex, who couldn't even do elementary arithmetic at the time. Hi, Clark, David. As the two chatted and were about to drive away from the market, they suddenly bumped into Chloe and Pete, who were also out for a spring outing. The two waved happily and came over. Who wouldn't love to go for a walk in the spring, on a sunny day with such fresh air? Chloe took a deep breath, feeling very happy. After a few words, Pete seemed to suddenly remember something. By the way, have you seen Greg? No, what happened? You might not believe it, but yesterday Gregor knocked Whitney unconscious at the school gate and she ended up in the hospital. Police arrived at the house and found Greek's mother murdered, her body wrapped in a spiderweb-like substance, while Greek was missing. He looked around and lowered his voice, making the atmosphere suddenly strange. You mean, Greek killed his own mother? Clark frowned, incredulous. Would anyone kill their own mother? Generally speaking, that's impossible, that's what the police suspect. Chloe shrugged. Maybe his appearance has changed drastically because he has a mental illness, then it's no longer impossible. Anyway, if you run into Greg, be careful. Page 21. Pete gave a serious reminder. A guy who might even kill his own mother is capable of anything. I will meet with Clark. David nodded, seemingly lost in thought. Does kryptonite cause genetic mutations and drastically change a person's personality? By the way, where's your stall? We're free right now, let's go help out. Chloe smiled, her eyes narrowing. She and Pete used to visit Kent's farm often and were quite familiar with the Kent family. Thank you, Chloe, Pete. After pointing out the stall to the two men, David and Clark started their pickup truck and drove onto the highway. Call. Once on the deserted suburban highway, Clark drove with a worried expression, his eyes not even on the road ahead. Could you watch the road, Clark? David frowned. If the car flips over, we'll both be hurt, but it'll add to the family's expenses. If Greg really goes mad. Clark turned his head and said worriedly. Will Lana be in danger? Get out of the way. David glanced ahead and suddenly reached for the steering wheel. Ahead, overhead, a cold and sinister figure, with an abnormal speed, leaped from the top of a roadside tree, like a mantis pouncing on its prey, instantly covering several meters and swooping down with immense force. Chapter 19. You want to be Superman too? Chi. On a deserted suburban highway, the loud screeching of tires could be heard from afar. A faint smell of burning rubber filled the air as the old red pickup truck suddenly drifted and swerved, trying to avoid a figure lunging from above. In midair, the figure unleashed incredible power from its waist, forcefully twisting its body in an attempt to grab the roof with its 5 fingers, but it only grazed the edge and missed. Stab it! After the ear-piercing metallic scraping sound from above, the pickup truck veered off the road, and David braked and Clark got out. The figure who did what would be tantamount to suicide for an ordinary person did not fall and bleed profusely, but instead, like a nimble flea, easily flipped over and landed steadily. Greek. Black leather jacket, blonde slicked back hair, familiar profile. Clark recognized him before the man had fully turned around and exclaimed, "Why did you attack us?" Seeing Greg's unusual skill, he had a bad feeling and asked a question. "I heard something happened to your mother. Did you do it? She got in my way, and you're next." Greg slowly turned around, as if he were confident and prepared, like a spider facing its prey that was trapped in its web and unable to escape. He was in no hurry to launch another attack and let out a cold laugh. "Are you crazy?" Clark couldn't believe what he was hearing. "How could someone be so evil? She's your mother. We are no longer on the same level of existence as you." The once timid and withdrawn Greg now exudes an aura of apex predator, standing at the top of the food chain, looking down upon other life forms. "Now I am not bound by any morals or rules." He opened his arms wide, his contempt emanating from the depths of his heart, and his voice rose. "I'm ahead of you, ahead of everyone. You want to be Superman too?" David turned his gaze away from the 5 clear scratches on the roof of the car and heard these words, his voice cold and mocking. How can someone claim to be superior to anyone else in terms of life level when facing a Kryptonian child and an eternal bloodline? Greek's anger plus 0.18, plus 0.17. "David, you're asking for it." Enraged by the blunt mockery, Greg was furious. David remained calm. "This guy provides more emotional triggers than Jeremy, is it because he's stronger?" "Greek, listen, you need treatment." Clark wanted to calm him down, not ruling out mental health issues, and perhaps there was a way to cure his current cold and crazy nature and turn him back to his former self. "Call. Treat? You are the ones who need to be eliminated." Greg moved with ghostly speed, leaving a trail of afterimages as he threw a punch at David, the force of which roared through the air. "David, no!" Ambushed midway, Clark exclaimed in surprise when he noticed that David's expression seemed even colder than before. Greg assumed Clark was worried about his brother, and looking at David, who seemed not to have reacted yet, his eyes revealed cold-bloodedness and ferocity. "I'll deal with you first." Bang! Just a second before he was about to hit, David stood still, as if facing a flying insect, without even blinking. The next instant, as if struck by an ancient battering ram, a fist struck his chest like lightning, arriving first after the initial strike. Bang bang bang! Greg flew backward at an even faster speed than he had come, instantly crossing the road and crashing heavily into the grass a dozen meters away. He continued his momentum, tumbling several times before finally stopping. Greek. Clark looked over quickly, fearing that David had killed someone. David stood expressionless by the roadside, his skin stained purple, his chin marked with lines resembling the furrows of the earth, exuding a powerful and imposing aura. "What bit you?" Greg scrambled to his feet, staring at David with a look of surprise and disbelief. He was bitten by an insect carrying meteorite dust, and his body molted and evolved. David, on the other hand, has purple skin. What kind of animal bit him? Surprisingly, he wasn't injured at all. David lifted his eyelids slightly, somewhat surprised. It seemed that this Greg was quite sturdy and hadn't used much strength. He looked at him like he was a fool, his tone dull. "I don't know what you're talking about. Are the brains of these people whose genes have been mutated by kryptonite also damaged? You're not strong enough to hurt me." Greg slammed his foot into the ground, sending dirt flying. His figure shot forward like a cannonball, bringing a gust of wind with him as he threw another punch. Before his fist even landed completely, one could feel the air being compressed by the terrifying force, making it hard to breathe. "Did you know that dung beetles can move things that are 1,200 times their own weight?" Page 22. A smug glint flashed in his eyes, his face filled with murderous intent. "Stop, Greg, you've lost your mind." Clark dodged, faster than a speeding space shuttle, and blocked the attack in the way, trying to shield his brother. But Greek's strength was greater than he had imagined. Bang! The fist slammed into Clark's face, sending him flying dozens of meters like a shooting star. David glanced at the Kryptonian son who had been sent flying, knowing that he had once again suffered a setback because he had held back. "I was afraid that the other party would crash into the steel wall like an ordinary person and be seriously injured, and as a result, he would often be knocked away as a god among men." Without pausing, Greg pressed on relentlessly, raising his fist once more as if to smash David's head like a boulder crashing down, like cracking a watermelon. Bang! David turned his head, as if slowly and steadily raising his palm to catch his fist. The raging force was like a small wave encountering a towering, unmoving cliff, coming to an abrupt halt in an instant. Call! A white shockwave swept up dust and debris from the road, causing the hard asphalt road to crumble and create a deep crater several meters in diameter. Gravel flew out like bullets. On the edge of the highway, Clark, who had just arrived, had to shield his eyes with his hand. "Dung beetles," David said. "Sorry, I'm not interested in insects." As he spoke, he applied force with his hands, as if using a hydraulic press with hundreds of tons of power to press the object together. Ah! With a crisp cracking sound, Greg's hand was crushed, and he screamed in agony, collapsing to his knees. The broken bone pierced the flesh, and a warm liquid flowed out of the palm. David casually released him, glanced at his blood-stained palm, which was reddish-green and slightly sticky. "Did you get bitten by an insect and mutate?" Recalling what Greg had said earlier, he frowned and felt a little nauseous. "Go to hell." Greg's finger bones shattered and bent at an abnormal angle. His primal ferocity was unleashed, and he swung his other fist in an attempt to sneak up on David, but missed. Swish! David was not surprised at all, he flashed behind him. With a reaction far exceeding that of ordinary people, Greg unleashed astonishing speed, his punches creating a gust of wind, and his counterpunch was so fast that it almost reached David's speed. Bang! "That's pretty fast." David grabbed his arm, raised an eyebrow in surprise, and with a flick of his wrist, broke his other intact arm as easily as snapping a cornstalk. "But that makes sense. If those annoying bugs weren't agile, how would they survive?" "Ouch, my arm!" With both arms crippled, Greg collapsed to the ground in agony, his face contorted in pain. "No. It's impossible. Why did you break my hand so easily?" After he woke up, he had clearly tested his abilities. Like some beetles with incredibly hard exoskeletons, his bones were as hard as steel, but in David's hands, they were as brittle as a thin stick. You overestimate yourself and provoke humans, you should know what the consequences usually are. Not interested in answering his question, David said, and was about to attack again. In a flash, Clark rushed forward and quickly stood in front of Greg, reaching out to stop him. Don't kill him. Chapter 20, Luther robs a bank? You're still alive. Greg, trembling with pain, couldn't believe his eyes when he saw Clark, who was almost completely unharmed except for a bit of dirt on him. Should we leave it to the courts for judgment? David knew what Clark wanted to say. We can't cross that line. Clark said seriously, they couldn't do anything to disappoint their parents. And then make him tell me about the pair of freak brothers in town who are both incredibly strong. David continued. Clark hesitated upon hearing this. He didn't want to cause trouble for his family, but he let David repeat his old tricks. Absolutely not, Clark instinctively resisted. Discuss it with Greg, even though he knows it's too naive. How to do? Swish. Suddenly, Greg, who should have been in too much pain to get up, suddenly stood up and fled like the wind, kicking up dust as he ran into the forest below the road. David narrowed his eyes, his powerful vision locking onto the target, and observed that the target's running posture revealed that both arms had been fully restored. The tenacious vitality of insects. Clark, aren't you going to chase after them? He glanced at Clark, who had just blocked his view. Clark realized that putting aside how to resolve the matter, it would be disastrous if Greg escaped and took revenge on his parents. This time he held nothing back, and in a single movement he caught up with Greg, who was moving at near supersonic speed, and blocked his path. Greek, I can't let you go and hurt other people. Clark could guess to some extent why Greg attacked him. He and the other person had almost no interaction before, and their only recent interaction was because of Lana. Why are you so fast? Just as Greg was about to approach the forest, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. He slammed on the brakes and stared at Clark in surprise. At the same time, a stone was flung out of his raised leather jacket pocket. He turned his head to look again. David had already walked over, and was now a dozen meters behind him. The two brothers are incredibly strong and faster than a rocket. Greg suddenly regretted that he shouldn't have dealt with these two competitors before going to find his dream girl to have offspring. Regret from Greg plus 0.13, plus 0.09. Suddenly, Clark let out a muffled groan, as if his strength had been rapidly drained, and he collapsed to his knees, unable to support himself. He glanced at the stone that had flown a few meters to the side. The grey-black exterior conceals a glowing green crystal inside. A meteorite just like Lana's necklace. His face was grim. But the crystal on Lana's necklace is more than 10 times larger. What? Thinking he was caught in a pincer movement and had no hope of escape, Greg was surprised to discover that the meteorite he had speculated might be related to his own mutation was actually Clark's weakness, who was as fast as lightning. He considered picking up a stone to use against Clark, but then remembered David behind him and quickly gave up and turned to run away. Fear from Greg plus 0.22. Pity. David picked up a stone from the ground, squinted, aimed at Greg's fleeing figure, and hurled it with all his might. Call out! With a sharp sonic boom, the force carried by the rock was even greater than that of an anti-material sniper bullet, hitting Greg precisely in the head. Bang! As Greg excitedly ran into the forest, his head exploded like a watermelon, the shockwave spreading and scattering red and white petals all over the ground. The man was killed before his eyes, and Clark's eyes widened as he looked at his brother. David! I had no choice. There were no more emotional triggers, he was completely dead. It seemed that Greg's self-healing ability wasn't strong enough to make him immortal and reborn. David helplessly shrugged. If he didn't have regenerative abilities, I wouldn't kill him. Page 23. If possible, he also hopes to create another human-shaped emotion generator. From Jerome's Madness 0.15, Hatred 0.11. He didn't know what it felt like for a person in a vegetative state to have consciousness but be trapped in darkness, but it must have been very unpleasant. Because in just 2 days, Jerome's emotions became increasingly extreme and intense, providing him with more and more emotional triggers. "You killed him, David!" Clark shouted in a low voice, slightly excited. "You can definitely catch up with him, or you can remove the meteorite so I can catch up with him." He should have been more careful. If he hadn't been infected, he could have stopped David. Clark's regret plus 16, anxiety plus 15, worry plus 13. "And then?" David asked in return, unhurriedly. "What good would it do to catch him? Do you have a better way to deal with him?" With that, he stepped forward, picked up the meteorite, and turned to leave. "I'm waiting for you to come up with a better idea and tell me, Clark. But are there problems?" As the kryptonite radiation dissipated, Clark regained his strength, looked at the headless corpse, his face filled with regret, and clenched his fist. After David drove the car back onto the highway, Clark, his hands covered in mud, returned with a slightly disappointed look. "What have you done?" "I buried Greg deep in the forest." "If we go by the law, you've destroyed evidence that I killed Gregor. You're an accomplice and should be convicted as well," David chuckled. "Good." Clark looked up and said seriously, "But you are my only brother." David shook his head. "If Clark, when you said that, you didn't have that determined look in your eyes, like a juvenile detention center counselor facing a repeat offender. Perhaps, I'll be touched for a second or two." David didn't want to get involved with the genetically mutated Gregor. But to his surprise, Clark came to his door to attack him, intending to kill him as well. It's probably because of Lana. Like the strong instincts of insects, they will defeat and eliminate all competitors in order to win a mate. He had the ability to recover, but couldn't become an emotional generator, so I had to kill him, which was a bit of a pity. However, after that day, Clark felt that he might not encounter a situation like Jerome's again, and that he could keep a close eye on David. His worries about David gradually decreased. But after David killed Gregor, Clark immediately began to worry about his descent into depravity again, and the worry became even stronger. Concerns from Clark plus 19, plus 20. Ignoring Clark's dull driving, David sat in the passenger seat, casually looking at the scenery outside. After David and his companion drove away. In the forest, a giant white wolf with beautiful, silky fur slowly emerged, gazing in the direction the two had left, its eyes filled with a hint of doubt, as if it were pondering something. "I secretly went to get the car paint repaired on the way, and used my amazing lung capacity and mouth to speed up the drying of the paint." Clark decided not to tell his parents about it for the time being, not wanting them to worry about it. It didn't take David much time to deal with Greg. After loading a cart with fruit, they returned to the market in less than an hour. Luther was still there, using the excuse of wanting to know how the fruit and vegetable business was in Smallville, and talking to Jonathan and Martha. Martha thought that if Luther decided to become a fruit and vegetable buyer, it might be good news for the townspeople who ran farms and orchards, so she didn't shut him out like her husband had. "Hi!" David and Chloe, who was helping out, greeted Pete. The fruit stand wasn't busy, and the two of them didn't really have much to do. "Lex, are the fruits from my orchard really that appealing to you?" Seeing that Luther was still there, Clark smiled and made a joke. Luther observed his somewhat sullen expression, then glanced at David, whose expression seemed natural, like he had just returned from a spring outing, before turning back to Clark. "What happened, Clark?" he tentatively asked in a soft voice. "You look like you're having some kind of trouble." A hint of unease flashed across Clark's eyes. "It's nothing. Clark, I was a bit mischievous when I was a kid." "This is a good opportunity to get closer," Luther said with a glint in his eyes. So I'm often called to the psychological counseling room. In order to prevent others from seeing through my thoughts, I've learned a bit about psychology. Mr. Luther, my son has some minor teenage troubles, but he can handle them himself. Noticing the two, Jonathan stepped forward, put his arm around Clark's shoulder, and refused, saying, I don't need you to do any psychological counseling. Besides, being called to the counseling room must mean more than just being naughty, right? David watched from the side, knowing that his father Jonathan probably thought Clark was still troubled by the floating incident that morning, so he didn't want Luther to ask any more questions. Luther smiled, as if he wanted to say something more. Suddenly, several armed police officers squeezed out from behind the crowd, showing their police IDs and arrest warrants. The surrounding crowd immediately dispersed, forming a circle to see what had happened. Mr. Lex Luthor, we are the Smallville Police Department. We now suspect you are involved in a bank robbery. Please come with us to assist with the investigation. A robbery? Luther was taken aback. Many eyewitnesses saw you rob a small-town bank at gunpoint half an hour ago, stealing $100,000 from the bank. You may have been wearing a bulletproof vest under your clothes. You were shot twice by the security guard on duty, but you still managed to escape. That's what the police officer said. I risked being shot to rob a small-town bank? And I only made $100,000. Disturbed by these police officers at a crucial moment, Luther wondered if he had misheard and laughed in exasperation. Sir, my factory donates more than $100,000 a year to schools, police stations, and fire safety facilities in this small town. Jonathan and Martha exchanged a frown. Bank robbery? The surrounding crowd was surprised and puzzled. They had all heard the name Lex Luthor and were connected to him. It was more likely that it was about acquiring a bank. Luther's eyes flickered as he looked at Clark and David behind him. I've been here for the past hour, and the Kent family can vouch for that. In an instant, all eyes, including those of the police and onlookers, turned to look. Jonathan was speechless for a moment. The update is a little late, I added an extra 1,000 words. Thank you to the reader Plain and Unremarkable for the 500 Kidian coins. Thanks to book friend 20220512234609502 for the reward of 200 starting coins. Thank you to reader Hauchanexi for the 100 Kidian coins. Chapter 21 David, how strong are you? I never expected my father to testify for Lex. When Clark returned home that evening, he was still a little surprised. Page 24. During the day, Luther did indeed stay by their fruit stand the whole time, never leaving their sight. But Jonathan, Luther's father who clearly disliked him, actually stepped forward to testify for Luther, clearing him of some suspicion. David raised an eyebrow and countered, do you think father would lie just to cause trouble for Luther? Clark scratched his chin, also finding it impossible. That last sentence practically cast doubt on his father's teachings over the years. Honesty is a bright mirror that reflects your character, and I do not want to tarnish that mirror for the sake of the son of Luther. Upon returning home and hearing his two sons talking, Jonathan took off his coat and opened his arms. Especially in front of you, my sons. The farm's fresh fruit sold for a good amount of money today. His hard work in planting had paid off, and he was in a good mood, raising his voice slightly. I wonder who was late for our date when they were young, even though they overslept, they said their motorcycle broke down halfway. Martha, who was coming from behind, shook her head. Sometimes a white lie is okay. Jonathan, slightly embarrassed, gently hugged his wife and raised an eyebrow at his two sons. Otherwise, where would we have this warm and cozy home now? Well, although the atmosphere at home was relaxed, Clark could tell from his father's words that his dislike for Luther remained unchanged. It's strange today, Luther hasn't left the market at all. Who robbed the bank? He recalled the events of the day, his words revealing a hint of confusion. Many people saw Luther, and the bank's CCTV also captured him. Maybe that robber looks a lot like Lex Luthor. In the kitchen, after washing her hands, Mother Martha began preparing dinner, glancing back and guessing. Luthor hasn't been in town for long, so not many people really know him. They might have mistaken him for someone else. She wiped the water droplets from her hands and continued to smile. Jonathan, do you remember Jack King from our school days? Apart from his curly hair, he looked so much like our English teacher. He always liked to imitate the teacher's tone and make funny faces behind their backs, until the teacher caught him and took him to the office to call his parents. Jonathan also recalled the fun times he had in school. Clark agreed, shrugging, maybe it's someone who thinks they look a lot like Lex and thinks they can try their luck. The police officer recounted the events of the incident. Lex Luthor went to the bank to withdraw money, and the department manager excitedly greeted the bank's big client. However, when it came time to sign, the signature did not match the previously saved signature template. The bank manager just casually asked if he could see his driver's license, wanting to process his business in a different way. Then he pulled out a gun. Thankfully no one was hurt. Finally, he summarized the topic that was being hotly discussed in the small town. However, Clark actually had another hypothesis. David, who had been silent for a moment, exchanged a glance with him. Both knew what the other was thinking, but neither said it in front of their parents. Even if the parents knew about the existence of the capable person, they still tried their best not to worry the two of them. After dinner, we went to the warehouse attic. As the cool night breeze blew and David gazed at the tranquil wheat fields in the distance under the moonlight, he turned to look at Clark, who had just secretly returned from outside. "Where have you been?" "Nothing." Clark scratched his head. David and Greg had fought during the day, damaging the road. Now that it was dark, he was worried that someone might drive into the ditch and cause an accident, so he went to check it out. "You're really kind." Hearing what he said, David couldn't help but sigh. When I arrived, the road maintenance contractor that the town had outsourced had just finished the work. They were baffled by the damaged road surface, thinking that even a few tons of steel falling from a truck couldn't have caused such damage. Clark spoke of what he had seen, glancing at David twice before casually asking a question. "David, how strong are you? You want to improve the relationship between my brother and me by arm wrestling." David narrowed his eyes slightly. "How old are you?" "No." "Perfect, I'm not interested in arm wrestling with you. You really need to practice how to conceal your intentions when you speak, Clark." He put his hands in his pockets and looked out at the night sky. "I don't think there's anything wrong with being sincere." Clark was still a little annoyed that his younger brother always spoke to him in a tone that made him seem more mature and intelligent than him. "Oh." David chuckled softly, "You dare say you just wanted to ask about my strength? The son of Krypton is in a bit of a predicament." His question just now was indeed not very naive. He wanted to know David's strength so that if something similar to Greg happened again, he would know exactly what kind of power to use to stop him. David saw through Clark's intentions. "Save your breath, I'm not telling you." After he finished speaking, he added another sentence. "Because to be honest, I don't know either." "David, do you think the guy who impersonated Luthor to rob the bank might be a superhuman?" Upon hearing this answer, Clark paused in surprise for a moment, then asked a question. "I encountered two people with special abilities in a very short period of time, which left a deep impression on me. Now, when he encounters strange things, it's like being almost bitten by a snake and then seeing a rope that looks like a snake, he instinctively starts to think in that direction." "Maybe." David does not rule out this possibility. "However, I don't think that anything strange necessarily has anything to do with people with special abilities. If he really is a superhuman, he might be able to withstand bullets with his bare body." Clark's expression was slightly solemn. "Even Greg, who has a strength of over 100 tons, doesn't have this kind of defense, it's likely that the user is an even more powerful ability user than Grike. David nodded. Rumors circulated in the town that, according to eyewitnesses, the man was clearly wearing only a light suit, not a bulletproof vest. But to the average person, there is no other explanation besides wearing a bulletproof vest for someone being shot twice in the back and escaping unharmed. Don't be afraid, the bank robbers shouldn't be interested in the farm. He patted Clark on the shoulder, turned around, and went down to the attic to sleep. But Clark was somewhat worried that there was a bank robber hiding in the town. I hope everyone else is okay too. Ding ding ding. Early morning. Inside an antique shop in a small town. Looking slightly aged with grey hair, Catherine carried a red school bag full of money and ran with difficulty up to the second floor of her house, urgently knocking on her daughter's door. Tina, where did you get this money? Tina, who had just washed her hair, leisurely came out of her room and casually dried it with a towel. I told you our lives would get better. Page 25. Tell me, you didn't rob a bank yesterday, Catherine said to her daughter, clinging to a last shred of hope, incredulously. Of course I didn't. With a high nose bridge and fairly pretty features, Tina, with her long reddish-brown hair, smiled. Before Catherine could catch her breath, she put down the towel, and a chilling and bizarre scene unfolded. Caca. Tina's flesh flowed like putty, her appearance suddenly changed, her body grew taller, her frame widened, and she turned into a bald Luthor with a sneer on her face. It was Lex Luthor who did it. Chapter 22 Black. It was Lex Luthor who did it. Tina spoke in a rough, masculine voice, her tone flippant. After saying that, she returned to her original state, playing with her hair with a hint of regret. It's a pity that the flaw was discovered in the signature, otherwise I wouldn't have needed to snatch it yesterday. You told me you wouldn't use this ability anymore. My daughter really robbed the bank, Catherine said, her lips trembling with anger and heartbreak. I'm doing this for our own good. After my father passed away, we relied on this deserted antique shop on the street, and gradually we even had trouble finding food and clothing. Tina tried to persuade her mother, her pupils dilated with excitement, and her face flushed. Look at this money, this is just the beginning, soon I will be able to live the same life as Lana. Both are shops, but Lana's aunt's flower shop makes much more money than this dilapidated antique shop, something Lana, who grew up in a poor family, deeply admired. Enough. I don't want to see you get hurt. Injured. She reacted as if she'd heard a joke. That bank security guard shot me twice in the back, but it only ruined one of my suits. Tina, no one's life is perfect, Catherine said, trying to soften her tone. Lana's. Tina's expression turned cold, and she interrupted him directly. She had heard these words countless times since she was a child. Lana was like a swan, from a wealthy family, beautiful and charming, loved by everyone since childhood, and the center of attention wherever she went, while Lana was just a dusty, ugly duckling by the roadside. This money was stolen. Not wanting to argue with her daughter any further, Catherine looked upset and angrily walked downstairs. I will return it to them and say that I found it next to the garbage truck. Don't do this, Mother, why can't we be happy? Tina impatiently rushed forward and grabbed the school bag, trying to snatch it away. Boom boom boom. During the struggle, she used too much force, and Catherine lost her grip on the bag, fell backward down the stairs, her old body rolled several times, and her head finally hit the wall hard, causing her to lose consciousness and her life hanging in the balance. Mom! Tina's eyes widened, and she hurriedly ran downstairs, throwing down her school bag. She wanted to make an emergency call, but as soon as she picked up the phone, she suddenly remembered something, hesitated for a moment, her face gradually turning cold, and then put it down. Before physical education class, everyone was changing into their sportswear in the locker room. What? Clark suddenly felt a blur before his eyes. He rubbed them hard and opened them again, startled, and let out a scream. The room was filled with skeletons covered in blood and flesh, with even the blue and purple blood vessels clearly visible within the flesh, like a scene from a horror movie. Clark? Pete, standing nearby, wondered why he had screamed. But to Clark, it was a fleshy skeleton that turned its head, and he was so frightened that he stepped back. My eyes! My eyes! What happened? Another muscular, ancient Greek sculpted skeleton turned its head, frowning. Seeing Clark suddenly scream in surprise, David, who had just changed his shirt, asked. As Clark retreated in a panic, his eyes suddenly pierced through the wall and saw the women's changing room next door. One by one, girls wearing underwear were changing clothes, and among them was a familiar figure, Lana. Black. The future Superman's eyes gradually widened, as if he were seeing a beautiful and pleasing landscape, and a smile with his white teeth unconsciously appeared on his lips. What's wrong with your eyes? Pete asked again. What's wrong with Clark? After his initial surprise, Clark stared blankly at the wall, grinning foolishly. Nothing. Clark snapped out of his daze, shook his head, and quickly dealt with Pete. After Pete left, he continued changing his clothes slowly, gazing longingly at the wall. David glanced at the wall over there, which led to the women's changing room, and then at Clark's eyes, which were practically glued to the wall. He immediately guessed what was going on. Your nose is bleeding, Clark. Suddenly a voice came from behind. Distracted, Clark frantically touched his nose, but found nothing in his hand. Wait a minute, how could I have a nosebleed by myself? Looking up, he saw David with his arms crossed, looking at him with a playful gaze that seemed to see right through him. Under that gaze, Clark felt as uncomfortable as a thief caught in the act, and inexplicably looked away, his eyes filled with guilt. Why did you suddenly say that? Did David discover the strange new thing about him? You mean you've developed a new ability, the ability to see through people and things? Martha looked uneasy as she watched Clark sitting on the sofa at home. Jonathan gently patted his wife's back to reassure her and listened quietly beside her. David leaned against the dining table with his arms crossed, a slight smile on his lips. Clark didn't dare to look up and meet his gaze. Clark's guilty conscience plus 11, shame plus 12. Sometimes it can see through things, like an X-ray. Sitting on the sofa, Clark lowered his head and pretended to be depressed, his mouth sounding muffled as if he had a towel in it. Uncontrollable. Sensing his wife's worry, Jonathan frowned. Unlike before, Clark's new abilities have been appearing far too frequently lately. A floating object appeared just 2 days ago, though it hasn't reappeared since. The series of changes seemed to suddenly shatter the silence, causing an instinctive unease in people's hearts. I don't know how to control it. Clark looked up and glanced at David. Really? David sneered. Before PE class, you kept staring at the wall and seeing through things, but you didn't see your new ability fail. He said meaningfully, some things just depend on whether you want to or not. The future Superman awakens supervision and immediately uses it to spy on the women's changing room. He's truly a god of noble character, yet he still has the nerve to try to lecture him. Page 26. Unfortunately, I didn't bring my camera this morning. The eyes also have muscles, like blinking and focusing, and you can try to control them, Clark. Jonathan wondered what his youngest son was pointing to on the wall, but instead of asking further questions, he earnestly offered a reminder. I will try. Clark agreed, a fleeting look of hesitation crossing his face. He offered Clark a few words of comfort and advice. Make sure Clark is careful, thankfully, the ability isn't dangerous. Then, his mother, Martha, packs her clothes, preparing to go out. Jonathan also left the room to feed the cows on the farm. Blah blah. What else were you about to say, Clark? A series of footsteps sounded, and David walked over. He had noticed Clark's expression earlier and smiled, trying to confess your behavior to your parents. He drawled, after all, there's nothing wrong with being sincere, right? My strength has been increasing at a faster rate these past 2 days. Upon hearing the familiar words, Clark coughed and blushed. Seeing that his parents were not around, he lowered his voice. The sudden appearance of this new anomaly was enough to worry his parents, so he didn't say anything more just now. Strength is increasing faster. David raised an eyebrow. This surprised him. What do you think is the reason? Unlike the known and inevitable supervision, he hadn't considered the possibility of this for the time being. Perhaps it's the end of puberty, which is when people's bodies develop the fastest. Clark paused for a moment, then analyzed the situation. 18 is a period of dramatic transition from adolescence to adulthood. You're not an alien. A look of realization flashed across David's eyes. He had forgotten about such a simple possibility, but he still spoke. Can't aliens have puberty? That's right, there are indeed some. David smiled knowingly, his words carrying a hidden meaning, and Clark's expression turned somewhat embarrassed again. Chapter 23 No One Can Stop Me. Whoosh! In the afternoon, the weather was somewhat gloomy, and a cold wind blew low through the streets of the small town. Mother Martha went shopping, and Clark and David followed along to help carry the groceries. With signs of impending rain, pedestrians hurried through the town. Clark had just loaded the 2 large bottles of discounted laundry detergent into his car when his vision blurred. The surrounding scenery transformed into a silent film, turning black and white. The people walking on the street were no longer residents, but skeletons. A woman carrying a shopping basket casually walked by, and Clark, at a loss, made a gesture to avoid her. David knew that his supervision had been activated uncontrollably again. Control your talent with your heart, do not be afraid or resist it. Zed had barely arrived on Earth and been exposed to sunlight when he adapted to the various abilities that suddenly appeared within a minute, although this was related to the fact that he was a well-trained elite warrior. But even though they are both Kryptonians, Zed doesn't have any extra organs or legs compared to Superman, and his potential is even less. Think about why you were able to manipulate it before PE class. Looking at Clark's troubled face, David suspected that it was related to Clark's mental state. He resisted the abilities that had suddenly appeared within him, which made him seem like an alien, and it was only when he was reminded from time to time that they worked intermittently. Clark was about to speak when a strange skeleton suddenly appeared in the distance, immediately catching his attention. The other figures appeared as if they had been X-rayed, in a black and white world, while the skeleton inexplicably emitted a bright green fluorescence, like meteorite. This instantly reminded Clark of something that had caused him many losses. For some reason, even though those meteorites came to Earth with him, they were his nemesis. He felt weak all over whenever they got close. What's wrong, Clark? Has it happened again? Martha came out of the supermarket and, seeing that her eldest son was not behaving well, suggested that they go home immediately. Let's go home. No, I'm fine. Seeing the emerald green skeleton walk into a small shop on the side of the street, Clark shook his head, took a deep breath and tried to control it. 2 seconds later, he actually shut down his ability. David is right, I can do it as long as I don't resist it. He was overjoyed, but when he looked at his calm younger brother, he felt a sense of defeat. The talent was clearly his, but his younger brother understood the secrets of it better than he did. David was not surprised at all. As we all know, Superman is a somewhat idealistic creature. Martha was pleased that her eldest son showed signs of being able to control his newfound abilities, so there was no need to worry about any problems arising from them. Mom, didn't you just say you were going to the antique shop? Clark had just seen the emerald green skeleton walk into the antique shop on the side of the street. Our bedroom lamp is broken. Please have your Aunt Catherine fix it. After walking a few steps, Martha led her 2 sons into a dilapidated antique shop on the side of the street. Jingle! The door opened, and the welcome bell rang. The display is filled with a dazzling array of items. Porcelain and horn artifacts are arranged in glass cabinets, while oil paintings, antique clocks, and colorful embroidery hang on the walls. There were also some tiny statues, each about the size of a palm, with a strong ancient African tribal style, casually placed in a corner. It's supposed to be an antique shop. David looked around and wondered if there were any real antiques among them. He couldn't say anything about the antique shop that had been reduced to repairing home appliances. Most of it is from last week. Kent woman. I mean Martha, how have you been lately? Catherine emerged nimbly from behind the store, a hint of nervousness in her eyes, a ritualistic smile on her face. How's business? Martha had no doubts. After all, the person in front of her was the Catherine she knew, with the same eyes, nose, and even the wrinkles at the corners of her eyes. Not bad. I've come to get the lamp. After chatting for a couple more minutes, Martha smiled and got down to business. Desk lamp. Catherine was puzzled. Clark secretly wanted to reactivate that special perspective. I strained to control the muscles in the corners of my eyes, and after 7 or 8 seconds I finally succeeded. Behind the counter in front of me was a fleshy skeleton emitting the glow of a meteorite. But, why are you so much shorter? The skeleton was different from what he had just seen. She had been a young woman a moment ago, but now she was hunched over. Could there be two? I remember that Aunt Catherine's daughter, Tina, also went to high school in the town, but she wasn't in the same class as me. That mahogany table lamp that Jonathan broke. After Martha's explanation, Catherine seemed to finally remember and turned to go inside to get it. What is the taste? David sniffed, and a faint, foul odor entered his nose. Clark sniffed it too, but didn't find anything. Besides their superhuman hearing and vision, Kryptonians possess other senses far exceeding those of ordinary humans, though they may not yet have awakened them. Page 27. As an ordinary person, Martha was completely unaware of anything. Sorry, Martha, let me check. That desk lamp isn't fixed yet. Could you come back next week? Catherine walked out with an apologetic look on her face. Of course. Martha, who was always easy to talk to, chuckled. She turned to leave with her 2 sons when suddenly a corner of a wad of cash was sticking out from under a cabinet near the stairs. He bent down and picked it up. This is... Thank you, Martha. I'm such a fool. Upon seeing the wad of money, Catherine hurriedly put it away, her tone slightly stiff. A customer paid in cash, and I searched for him all day. Turns out he was here. You're welcome. This is no small sum, Catherine. Please keep it safe. An unnatural glint flashed in Martha's eyes, but she smiled. After giving her instructions, she quickly left with her 2 sons. As they left the antique shop and walked down the street, Martha murmured to herself. A ribbon from the town's savings and loan program was tied to that stack of money. The town's bank had just been robbed, and then a stack of $10,000 from the bank appeared in Catherine's shop. It's hard not to make connections. Catherine said the customer paid, but we all know her antique shop hasn't been open for a long time. I don't think Aunt Catherine's family could afford to just throw away $10,000. David noticed the panic on Catherine's face when the wad of money appeared. The person who robbed the money is very likely connected to her. I saw it too. Clark turned to look at the antique shop as he spoke, and saw a surprising scene. Inside the antique shop, a hunchbacked figure seemed to have been stretched and grown taller, its chest and back straight, becoming the same as the one he had seen before. And most importantly, a woman's corpse was placed in a cabinet in the store. Aging, stooped, the heart no longer beats, and the blood has congealed. I don't think what we saw was Aunt Catherine. He opened his mouth. Who is that? Martha asked, puzzled. I don't know, but, Clark stated his discovery. Someone she'd known for years might be dead, their body was right behind her. Martha was somewhat frightened and decided to go home first to discuss with her husband Jonathan how to resolve the matter. Even though her eldest son had extraordinary abilities, she didn't want him to get involved in this matter easily. As soon as the door closed, Tina's skin and flesh flowed like putty, returning to their original state. Thinking of Martha's unnatural expression after discovering the money, she hung up the temporarily closed sign expressionlessly, her cold voice echoing in the store. No one can stop me from achieving happiness. Chapter 24 Just in case. Arrive home. You mean you saw Catherine, but Catherine might already be dead. After listening to his wife and two sons' accounts, the green skeleton, the deformity, the corpse, the money, Jonathan was momentarily confused. The people who greeted us at the antique shop were probably the bank robbers. Based on what Clark had said earlier, David felt the matter was obvious. First it was Luther, then it was Catherine. She has the ability to shapeshift and can transform into other people. Who could that person be? Martha was extremely uneasy, rubbing her arms. This was terrifying. The other person could transform into an acquaintance and silently approach her. She hadn't realized at all that the other person wasn't someone she knew. Clark frowned, deep in thought. First, it was certain that the skeleton was female, and secondly, it seems there are no other clues for the time being. It's Tina. After frowning and thinking for a few seconds, David suddenly spoke. The three family members looked at him with puzzled expressions. Clark asked, "Why Tina?" "She has that ability. She could have easily killed someone and escaped. Why did she have to become Aunt Catherine's likeness? The police would never be able to find her. Unless Catherine is dead, the police will definitely come after her." After analysis and speculation, he concluded that it was Catherine's daughter, and laughed. Only Catherine's daughter, Tina, would be the only relative of the deceased, regardless of who killed Catherine. Tina robbed the money and killed her own mother. She did this out of guilt. Catherine. Martha is saddened by the passing of someone she once knew well. Don't speak too definitively, son. Jonathan held his wife's cold hand to comfort her, frowning as he spoke. A daughter killed her mother, this. Such a heinous crime, which defies all human ethics, is simply too horrifying. David raised an eyebrow at his father's instinctive reluctance to believe such a tragedy, but said nothing. I noticed her skeleton is a bit different. Clark carefully recalled his memories and finally remembered yet another clue that he wasn't sure if it could even be considered a clue. It emitted a strange green light, and the skeletal lines were a bit odd. Unlike the smooth and natural lines of a normal person's ribs, that person's ribs were of varying thicknesses. When Catherine was with Tina, she was already quite old, and Tina was born with osteomalacia. Martha seemed to recall something terrible, and her face turned slightly pale. She and her husband sought medical help everywhere. Doctors believed she wouldn't live to the first grade of elementary school. They spent money to find ways to get her many experimental drugs that were still in the development stage, but it didn't work. Jonathan frowned and took over the conversation, his voice somber. Later, they had no choice but to take Tina back to the town, and somehow a miracle happened, and Tina gradually recovered. He is now somewhat convinced of his son's reasoning that Tina is the murderer. Desperate people sometimes resort to any treatment they can find. David stroked his chin and looked at Clark. I heard that when the meteorite first struck, some charlatans came to the town, claiming that the meteorite was a gift from God and that soaking it in water could cure all diseases. The rest is self-explanatory. One can imagine that Catherine and her husband, having exhausted all other options, would have tried everything they could, and were overjoyed to thank God when they discovered their daughter's amazing improvement. But Catherine probably never imagined that she would die because of her daughter. David is right, that person might be Tina. Clark's eyes widened. With the younger brother's analysis and the information provided by their parents, all the clues came together. No wonder that person's skeleton glowed like a meteorite, because she had been drinking water infused with meteorite since she was a child. Now that you've seen the body, call the police first. Jonathan pondered for a moment, deciding not to give the killer a chance to escape, and picked up the phone to dial the police. Briefly recounting the situation, they found what appeared to be money stolen from a bank in Catherine's antique shop, and also smelled a stench of decay. The police immediately dispatched officers to the antique shop. "All right, kids, the police have gone." Once discovered on the spot, Tina couldn't escape even if she transformed into someone else. David frowned. Page 28. This is not a safe bet. The couple had no idea that Tina, in addition to her shape-shifting ability, was so physically strong that she could withstand bullets, making her a formidable opponent for ordinary police officers. "I need to ask for leave this afternoon and won't be going to school," David suddenly said. Kryptonite is undoubtedly the reason why some people in the town gained their abilities. So, if I spend more time with kryptonite, get more kryptonite radiation, or even consume kryptonite, will my power increase? His eyes flickered. Was this what Tina had been drinking since childhood, infused with water made from meteorites? "I also need to ask for leave." Clark followed closely behind, remaining vigilant with a serious look in his eyes. He was determined to protect his parents from any harm. David glanced at Clark. If it were anywhere else, a random small town with superpowers could make it impossible for Thanos, with his physical abilities, to easily protect his parents from any harm. He would find it absurd. But sometimes Superman encounters enemies that even he finds troublesome or dangerous. Better safe than sorry. It would be best if he and Clark both stayed behind to protect the couple. Even if it turns out to be a false alarm in the end, it's better than something he absolutely doesn't want to see happening that he'll regret for the rest of his life. Why? The couple were puzzled by their two sons' strong reaction. "Are you afraid Tina will attack us?" Dong dong. Just as the two were about to explain, there was a knock on the door. Through the glass door of the outer door, in the dim sunlight, Lex Luthor stood outside, a polite smile on his face, his voice friendly. "May I come in?" Jonathan and Martha immediately tensed up and stood up from their stools. David and Clark stepped forward and stood in front of their parents. David gave Clark a wink. Clark attempts to reopen the X-ray vision to observe Lex's skeleton outside the door. However, due to some tension, it was not started for a long time. "What happened?" Lex Luthor opened the outer door and joked, puzzled, "It's me, not my evil twin, and I'm not carrying a gun." He raised his hands to show his family. "Clark, David, Mr. Kent, you all know I am innocent. Hurry up." Clark concentrated and tried to control himself. Finally, the image in his eyes became like being X-rayed again. He glanced at Luthor's entire body, breathed a sigh of relief, and spoke to his brother and parents, revealing a smile. "Lex, what are you doing here? The skeleton is normal, it's the real Lex Luthor." Jonathan and Martha were relieved. David secretly relaxed his tense body. If he were facing 10 ability users alone, he wouldn't be so nervous, but unfortunately his parents were right behind him. "I come to thank Mr. and Mrs. Kent. Without your testimony, I cannot clear my name yet." The Kent family reacted strangely, a hint of suspicion flashing in their eyes. Luthor chuckled. "Please come in, Mr. Luthor," Martha greeted him. "I watched the CCTV footage. I don't know how that person did it. He looks almost exactly like me. If it weren't for the different handwriting in his signature, I might be penniless by now." Luthor expressed his genuine surprise and confusion. "It's a strange feeling to watch someone rob a bank in broad daylight with my face on their head." He had intended to take the opportunity of expressing his gratitude to visit the Clark family and become acquainted with them. But upon arrival, Luthor suddenly sensed that the atmosphere at the house was somewhat somber and strange, suggesting it wasn't a good time to visit, and his plans had run into trouble again. This time, he did not demonstrate his keenness and intelligence by offering to help if there was any trouble. If someone dislikes another person, the more intelligent they appear, the more wary and resistant they will be. After chatting for a few minutes, I sincerely expressed my gratitude. His eyes sparkled, and I took my leave. Leaving the farm, Luther got into his silver-grey convertible, glanced at the Kent family in the house, frowned as if lost in thought, and drove away. I told my parents that Tina might be a powerful superhuman. After thinking for a while, Jonathan asked for leave for his 2 sons, citing the high incidence of flu in the spring as the reason. He didn't let David go to school, fearing he would be attacked alone. "David, you stay with us at home. Clark will protect us. I'll ask around and see what the police have to say. Maybe they'll be able to catch Tina." The update is a bit late, I wrote an extra 600 words. Chapter 25. Let's start with you, Martha. The father, Jonathan, called the police as dusk approached. The town police came to the door, took a statement, and the town sheriff Bob, who was accompanied by several officers, was Jonathan's high school classmate. "Bob, have you caught the murderer?" Jonathan asked. "We unfortunately found Catherine's body in her antique shop, but we didn't find any money. It's possible the murderer moved the money." When faced with an old classmate who was also the one who provided the clue, Bob did not refuse to reveal anything. "We staked out there for a long time. The killer may have escaped. We haven't found any suspicious people in the town. Catherine's daughter Tina has mysteriously disappeared. We suspect she may have been murdered as well. After a forensic examination, it was determined that Catherine's body had long since died. The person your wife Martha encountered was not Catherine." Bob frowned, muttering to himself as he recalled the bizarre bank robbery. Do those sophisticated espionage techniques that use disguise to create convincing illusions really exist? Jonathan didn't know what to say. After seeing Bob off, he turned around and sighed to his wife and sons. "Bad news, the police came up empty-handed. This might be a good thing." Martha said worriedly, "Tina has special abilities, and even a pistol can't subdue her. If we really encounter her, Bob and the others will most likely be in danger." David and Clark were not surprised, they hadn't expected the police to arrest Tina anyway. Whoosh! The sun sets, the starry sky covers the heavens, darkness envelopes the farm, a cold wind blows, and the wheat fields droop low. Under the bright lights, David and Clark stood on either side of the doorway. "I guarantee that if Tina attacks, they will be the first targets. Even if you try to get around from behind, you can't escape David's exceptional hearing. She had better not wait until tonight to get her revenge." David gazed into the distance, his voice carrying a chilling undertone, like the howling wind outside the door. Tina had to pretend to live a normal life as Catherine to avoid attracting police attention. She didn't show up in town for half a day, so she probably knew something had happened. It's not hard to guess who called the police. There's no such thing as 1,000 days to catch thieves, but 1,000 days to guard against them. According to the forensic examination, Aunt Catherine may have fallen down the stairs and died accidentally from a head injury. Clark hesitated as he tried to scan his surroundings with his supervision. "What do you want to say?" David sensed that he hadn't finished speaking. Clark glanced back at his parents sitting in the living room, his face showing reluctance, and lowered his voice. "I'll handle Tina in a bit, I'll take care of her." Tina attacked her parents, and the chill emanating from her younger brother was even stronger than when he last faced Greg, who had died at his hands. He didn't want David's hands to be stained with blood again, so that he wouldn't be able to turn back. Then, despite it being a recurring issue, Clark patiently persuaded him, and David, arms crossed, didn't get angry. Page 29. "I've already come up with a solution." Clark raised an eyebrow, a hint of smugness in his expression. "How to subdue bad guys without worrying about them revealing my identity and abilities." "Oh." David was a little surprised. He pulled a blue woven hood from his pocket, looked around to make sure no one was watching, and quickly put it on, covering his entire face except for his eyes. "Can you still recognize who I am, David?" Clark deliberately lowered his voice and said in a deep tone. "Robbers who are going to rob a bank." David lifted his eyelids. The son of Krypton finally used his brain and came up with the idea of wearing a hood to hide his identity, but this outfit was just like a bank robber except that he didn't have a gun. "This is the inspiration I got from comics." Undeterred by the teasing, Clark finally found a solution to the problem that had been troubling him, and said earnestly, "I can't make Greg and the others not reveal my abilities, but I can make them think that some unknown person subdued them. So don't do anything later, lest your parents notice something is wrong with you." Clark thought that once this problem was solved, his brother would no longer have a reason to shut others up by turning people into vegetative states and committing murder. But the naive son of Krypton was unaware that David had other motives for doing so. Russell. While Clark was trying to persuade David, a slender and delicate black-haired figure walked over from a distance. She was shivering and hugging her arms, her face red from the cold. She looked like a pitiful girl who had just run away from home after a big fight with her parents and was looking for a safe haven. She walked over hesitantly. "Clark, David, why are you standing outside?" "Lana." Clark turned around and was utterly surprised to see the person he had a crush on suddenly appear at his doorstep. "Wait a minute, how did you recognize me?" He touched his face, he was clearly wearing a hood. "Your clothes, your height, most importantly, you're standing next to David." In the cold wind, Lana's eyes were red as if she had just cried, her voice was slightly hoarse, and her tone was low. Clark paused, realizing he'd forgotten about that. "What happened? Why are you like this, Lana?" He noticed tears in the eyes of the person he had a crush on, and his expression changed slightly. David, after giving Lana a cold look, secretly elbowed the infatuated boy who forgot everything else the moment he saw Lana. "Have you forgotten something, Clark?" Just as Clark was about to step forward, he suddenly remembered that it wasn't certain whether the person in front of him was Lana. He quickly activated his supervision. "Clark, my aunt thinks I should give Whitney another chance. I had a fight with my aunt and I have nowhere to go. Could I come to your house for a visit?" As Lana spoke, she seemed about to cry again and was about to step forward. "Stop!" Clark reached out and saw a green skeleton. He said angrily, "Don't try to fool me, you're not Lana." "What are you talking about, Clark? Who else am I but Lana?" Lana looked puzzled and aggrieved. David's eyes turned cold, ready to strike at any moment. "Tina, it's not too late for you to turn yourself in now." Looking at the tearful, aggrieved gaze of the person he secretly loved, Clark felt as if he were in a dream. He bit his lip to regain his senses and said in a deep voice. Inside the house, Jonathan and Martha noticed that their two sons were blocking Lana from the doorway. He cautiously picked up his shotgun and shielded his wife behind him. "You have ruined my life. I originally intended for your entire family to die one by one at the hands of your closest relatives, dying in shock, confusion, and pain." When her identity was suspected and exposed, Tina's pupil shrank. She looked at her brothers outside the house and the couple inside, her voice sharp as if it came from hell. After a series of changes, the skin, flesh, and bones returned to their original appearance. "How did you recognize me?" She wondered if the Kent family might know that someone could disguise themselves, but why was Clark able to recognize her just by looking at her? Was Aunt Catherine's death an accident or did you do it? Clark naturally didn't answer, instead, he stepped forward and pressed for an answer. "Having my identity exposed takes away some of the fun, but that doesn't stop me from killing you all. Let's start with you, Martha." When her mother's death was mentioned, Tina's angry gaze swept past the two of them and fixed on Martha. She kicked off the grass and leaped into the house, intending to kill Martha. Chapter 26 David, Clark, what's wrong with you two? Swish! As for the shotgun in Jonathan's hand, Tina saw it as no different from a fire poker. The instant she leaped into the air, blades of grass flew into the air, and time seemed to slow down 100-fold. Clark nimbly darted out, hoisted Tina up by the waist, grabbed her, and ran away into the distance. Despite seeing Tina's slow speed, he was confident he could subdue her. But judging from the force with which Tina kicked the grass, it must have been considerable. Even a casual stomp on the gate railing could have turned the wood shards into bullets. Clark didn't want any surprises to happen. After Clark and Tina disappeared, David aimed in one direction and gave chase at the speed of a normal athlete. "I'll go help Clark, father. You protect mother." "David, don't go." Jonathan, holding a shotgun, tried to call his son back, but his son had already run far away and disappeared from sight. David glanced back to make sure his parents were out of sight, then suddenly increased his speed. Suburban highway, under the streetlights. Clark slowed down to put Tina down, but Tina reacted in a flash, clasped her hands together, and slammed them hard against Clark's back. Bang! A dull thud. Like being hit on the back by a car, Clark was caught off guard and knocked to the ground, cracking the road surface and causing small stones on the road to bounce. "You have the ability to, Clark." Seeing that Clark was still alive, Tina grabbed him by the neck and tried to lift him up. Clark grabbed her wrist tightly, restraining her movements, his expression serious. "Tina, you can still turn back before you make an even bigger mistake." He had just caught Tina's anger. There might be something fishy about Aunt Catherine's death, and it might not have been Tina's doing. That would mean she hadn't actually killed anyone, but had only robbed a bank. Made a mistake? Tina sneered. "I'm just using my abilities to pursue happiness. What did I do wrong?" She was just about to exert herself to see who was stronger, hers or Clark's. Bang! A cold figure rushed in like lightning, his fist slamming into Tina's face. The shockwave sent Tina tumbling backward, like a pebble thrown into a lake, scraping across the surface before crashing to the ground several times and landing dozens of meters away. Even Clark, who was being held, was affected and flew 6 or 7 meters before falling to the ground. "Who?" Tina's face was flushed red, as if from a scratch, and she stood up, glaring angrily at the person who had come. David appeared in the light with a cold expression and clenched his fist. "Your bones are quite strong." The blow to this woman's cheekbone felt like hitting a high-density alloy. "David." Tina vaguely recognized David, her gaze shifting between Clark, who had just stood up, her expression fierce. "The older brother is capable, the younger brother is a monster." Page 30. "But your family shouldn't have come to provoke me." She was faster than a cheetah on the run, covering dozens of meters in the blink of an eye, and threw a punch that whistled through the air at David. Tina's astonishment plus 0.4, anger plus 0.6. Bang! The fist moved with the speed of a bullet and carried astonishing force. David stepped back to dodge the punch, and when she struck again, he grabbed her wrist. Tina tried to break free, but it was like being held by an iron clamp. The strength is good, but it's a pity that it's a very womanly fighting style. There is no order at all. His eyes were cold, and he exerted force with his hands, pressing down with hundreds of tons of power. "Let me go!" Tina screamed in pain, her face contorted with rage, and her other fist tore through the air as it struck David's head. As if he hadn't seen anything, David didn't move his body at all, but suddenly exerted force in his hands, with the force of over 1,000 tons. Under this terrifying force, even steel ingots would be crushed into iron mud. Cackling. Halfway through her punch, a sharp, excruciating pain shot through her wrist. Tina screamed, her body jerked as if electrocuted. She tried to pull her hand away from David's grasp, but to no avail. She stared at that handsome, cold face as if she were facing a ruthless, cold-blooded, terrifying creature, which filled her with fear. "David!" In the midst of the crisis, Tina's face contorted like mud, transforming into a woman's face with fine lines around her eyes, and she deliberately feigned extreme pain. Tina transformed into Martha's face, believing that David would instinctively let go upon seeing his mother's pained expression. David did just that, releasing his grip as if he'd been electrocuted. "How dare you!" But in the next instant, he realized what was happening and was filled with rage. Before Tina could escape, she felt a hand as if it were made of cast steel grab her head and slam her face down onto the ground. Bang! Gravel flew everywhere, and Tina's entire head was almost violently shoved into the ground. Giggle! Ah! Tina screamed, trying to lift her head, but the large hand pressed down on her skull, causing it to crack under the strain. The fear of death overwhelmed her. "Help! Help!" she cried out, her muffled voice coming from underground. David remained unmoved, his face cold, and raised his fist to strike. Click! "Let go, David!" Clark rushed over and grabbed David's wrist. This time he didn't hold back and quickly increased his strength, but when he found that even with maximum strength he couldn't pull David away, he stared at him in surprise. Clark was just about to use his hands. "Get out of the way!" David swung his clenched fist backward, sending Clark flying as if weightless. He then swung his fist down. Bang! Tina's hands, which had been struggling and flailing like a drowning person, fell limply to the ground, her head buried in the soil, and she stopped moving. "Tina!" Clark yelled and rushed to Tina's side, turning the person, whose life was uncertain, over. Fortunately, he was still breathing. "But I couldn't wake him up no matter what I did. You've turned someone into a vegetable again." He glared angrily at his younger brother. "I'm already being lenient by not killing her because she dared to take on my mother's appearance." David stood up, clapped his hands, looked down at his feet, and spoke in an icy tone. "Tina's fear plus 0.8, doubt plus 0.3, anxiety plus 1.0, anxiety, anxiety, fear plus 1.2, fear, fear. A complete process. A person faints, then discovers they are still conscious, wonders why they can't control their body, then frantically tries again, then realizes something, and finally feels fear." He did not kill Tina. In prisons for serious offenders, the punishment for unruly and disruptive criminals is often to put them in solitary confinement. There was only a faint ray of light through the crack in the prison door, the space was so narrow that you could barely take 2 steps, in the darkness, there was no one to talk to, and you couldn't even see your own hands. No matter how vicious a criminal is, he will become well behaved after being locked in a small dark room for 3 days. What awaits Tina is an enhanced version of the dark room that will last for decades. On the cold, icy lake shore, cars were parked and bonfires were lit. A lively outdoor barbecue party at noon on a holiday. David, Chloe, and the others sat around the fire, roasting meat. "David, Clark, what's wrong with you two?" Chloe, wearing a down jacket, asked in confusion. "If I remember correctly, I haven't heard you speak for several days. The atmosphere between you two these past few days has been as cold as this lakeside." Pete deliberately rubbed himself, his voice trembling, pretending to be freezing to death, his teeth chattering. "Oh God, save me!" He deliberately acted exaggeratedly and comically, trying to create a lively and relaxed atmosphere and give the two a chance to reconcile. "I don't feel cold," Clark said in a deep voice, turning the beef he was grilling. David took a sip of his cold fruit beer and looked at the distant lake, seemingly oblivious to what was happening. "Did you come from a cold alien planet?" Chloe asked curiously. She had never seen the two of them like this before. What exactly happened between these two brothers? Chapter 27 The Strange Transfer Student. Spring is not yet over, and even the chilly riverside cannot dampen the enthusiasm of a group of high school students for a holiday barbecue party. Template integration rate, 93%. David took a sip of fruit beer and gazed at the frozen river in the distance. A few days ago, after he left Tina in a vegetative state, the two returned home. Father Jonathan stood anxiously at the door, holding a shotgun. He breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that both his sons had returned safely. He then scolded David for chasing after them. To avoid worrying his parents, Clark took the initiative to say that he was the one who knocked the person unconscious and left him in front of the town's police station. Police later found the $100,000 that had been transferred in Tina's school locker. However, due to a lack of evidence and because Tina was unconscious for unknown reasons, she was temporarily taken into custody in the hospital as a suspect. Clark was unusually angry with David after that day and didn't speak to him for several days. David felt bad about making Clark take the blame again, but he didn't think it was a big deal. The Kryptonian sons who now vehemently oppose crossing that line will one day snap the neck of their last kin. Clark isn't that stubborn or rigid, he's just too young now and has a somewhat idealistic view of the world. Beside the fire, David clenched his fists, as if the muscles of a high-density alloy were twisted together, surging with the power of a volcanic eruption. The Thanos template gave him formidable strength. But it's not enough. Even the fully powered Superman has faced life-threatening situations multiple times in this dangerous world, and Earth has faced countless crises that nearly led to its destruction. There have even been instances where the Earth was completely destroyed. Looking up at the sky, David's eyes seemed to see the universe beyond the azure firmament. He incorporated Thanos's template, but he did not develop the ambition to dominate the universe, nor did he consider himself extraordinary enough to take on any responsibility related to the safety of the universe. He only has one goal in mind for the time being. Continuously improve your capabilities to ensure that you can protect yourself and your family no matter what happens. This goal is both simple and very difficult. Therefore, he will not miss the opportunity to gain emotional resonance. Hopefully the next template will be as powerful as Thanos. Page 31. Because of the unprecedented events that have occurred recently, coupled with Clark's rapid growth in strength as he matures and the increasing emotional points he provides, the templates are merging very quickly, and the next template should not be far off. A look of anticipation flashed in David's eyes. He quietly took another sip of his drink and silently prayed to himself. Ideally, it should also include some superpowers that don't require physical exertion. That way, if something like what happened a few days ago happened again, he wouldn't have to hide it from his parents and make them worry. In the distance, a slight commotion suddenly arose. A beautiful figure, full of vitality and wisdom, walked into the party, like a silver moonlight shining down in the dark night. Everyone's eyes were fixed on her, and all the boys' eyes followed her closely. Many boys, carrying their grilled steaks, rose up like bees and butterflies drawn to a flower, vying to invite her to sit down with them. A few of them almost got into a fight. Feel sorry. The girl was confident and poised, showing no stage fright, and politely declined each offer. The four people's attention was also drawn to it. Who is that? She looks like Lana. Clark tilted his head and asked the group in confusion, such a beautiful girl, but I don't remember her. Is this the excuse you made for yourself before you fell in love with someone else? David looked at the girl he had never seen at school before and said something indifferently. I really think it does, Clark argued in a muffled voice. I don't see any resemblance, Clark. Chloe agreed with David's assessment, her tone somewhat unnatural. Apart from the black hair, their facial features and temperament have almost nothing in common. She was a girl who had just transferred to our town's high school. I remember her name was Kayla. As he stared at the figure, Pete's eyes were fixed on it, as if his soul had been stolen away. Perhaps, my youth has only just begun today. Judging from her temperament, which is like that of a female jungle explorer, I don't think she would like a man who is shorter than her. Looking at the figure that was the focus of everyone's attention, Chloe, sitting on the edge of the party and not being approached by anyone, was a little sullen. Chloe, I think I smell something sour. When his most fatal weakness was mentioned, Pete gritted his teeth and turned away, saying that he was just a late bloomer. Just as he finished speaking, the beautiful figure not far away seemed to be looking in their direction. "Look, she's looking this way. She is tall and slender, with skin that is closer to a healthy wheat color. Her black hair is tied in a braid at the back, and her features have a mixed-race beauty. She wears indigenous ornaments around her neck, exuding a primitive and vibrant beauty." Pete coughed excitedly, adjusted his posture to stop peeking at the other person, and put on a deep, intrigued look as he grilled the meat, trying to find a different way to attract the other person's attention. But a few seconds later, when she turned her head again, Kayla had already sat down with several girls, chatting and laughing, and started barbecuing, seemingly unaware of what was happening here. He immediately deflated like a punctured balloon. Kayla's curiosity plus 0.04, doubt plus 0.03, friendliness plus 0.02, wariness plus 0.02. David paused in his beer-drinking motion and squinted at the figure. An ability user. In this small town, this is not surprising. But why is he both kind and wary of me, and why does he become wary again after getting close to me? Isn't that too contradictory? This series of emotional changes is perplexing. Clark didn't look at Kayla like the other three, instead, he glared at Lana in the distance. On a rock in the distance, Whitney sat next to Lana, who was grilling meat by herself. Whitney had to keep talking to her for a while before Lana would occasionally reply, her expression showing not joy but a hint of sadness. But the fact that couples who have broken up can still sit together and chat speaks volumes. For example, if Clark, who had been angry for a few days, were still as angry as he was at the beginning, and Chloe and Pete teased him and David, he wouldn't deliberately say something like, "It's not cold at all. Stab it, stab it." A few stones were piled up, and flames scorched the grill pan on top. Clark looked away, flipping the beef on the grill pan occasionally, and glanced at David next to him. Tina was beaten into a vegetative state by her brother, and he was undoubtedly initially angry about what her brother had done. But he had to admit that when Tina transformed into her mother Martha, he also felt an uncontrollable surge of anger rising within him. Especially afterward, when I thought about how Tina wanted to kill my mother, I couldn't feel much sympathy for her. Clark was more worried about his brother than himself. Given the current situation, he wondered if he hadn't managed to get his brother back on track, and it seemed he would be changed by his brother first, slowly getting used to his cold behavior. "Clark, don't just watch." Pete nudged his friend, winking and interrupting Clark's thoughts. "Whitney is making a strong push to get back together with Lana, and you're just sitting here like a coward." Clark was indeed somewhat shy. He couldn't bring himself to compete with Whitney for Lana when Whitney was around. Seeing his expression, Pete secretly shook his head. "Lana has been volunteering at the town's nursing home for the past 2 weeks. David suddenly said, tomorrow is the weekend, and Whitney is going to train with the football team. Clark, have you completed your 30 hours of community service?" As he spoke, he turned to look at Clark. The school requires students to complete 30 hours of community service each semester to cultivate their awareness of giving back to society. Clark's eyes lit up, and he immediately realized that this was a great opportunity for him. Thank you, David," he said with a hint of embarrassment. "My younger brother is always smarter than me and has better ideas." "You're welcome." David took a sip of his fruit beer. "Thinking about how you've taken the blame for me twice already, you've really acted like a good older brother, so how can I not repay you?" "Clark? What kind of pot?" Chloe asked curiously from the side. Chapter 28 The Old Lady Who Foresaw the Future. Clark gave vague answers to Chloe's questions to evade the question. "Perfect timing, we can go together." Pete suggested that a few of them go together, then shrugged. "It's a pity it's not summer now, otherwise I could be a lifeguard at the pool. That way I wouldn't have to be with the elderly people who wear dentures. However, since it's springtime and the weather hasn't fully warmed up yet, doing volunteer work indoors is better than picking up trash and cleaning the streets outdoors. Chloe had already done enough community service and declined the offer. She's not just paying attention to me, but also to Clark. David observed it. Although Kayla was chatting and barbecuing with several girls, she kept glancing over here. He was secretly observing her, and she was also secretly observing him and Clark. What is this person's purpose? Chloe, you look cold. Would you like me to warm you up? A handsome school team member with thick, short blonde hair, wearing a rugby uniform, walked over and struck up a conversation with Chloe. I can't believe you said such a thing so easily. Cray was surprised and embarrassed when someone approached her with such bold words. Don't get me wrong, I have a blanket. Would you like to come sit with me? Sean raised an eyebrow and gestured over there. Sean, you're not her type. Pete stood up, and despite being a head shorter, he met Sean's gaze without fear. David had heard of this Sean. He was a smooth talker who tricked girls into liking him, but they would break up with him not long afterward, a complete scumbag. In biology class, I was assigned by the teacher to do an experiment with Jenna from the next class. Chloe, a reporter for the school newspaper, had naturally heard of Sean's reputation and laughed. I heard you dumped her last week. Page 32. To be precise, we dumped each other. Sean remained calm. Seeing Chloe smile, he felt more confident and assured. Would you like to come sit with me? I promise I won't do anything, no matter how beautiful you are in my eyes. Finally, he spoke gently, looking at her with his most skillful gaze, his deep affection seemingly capable of melting anyone. A blush crept onto Chloe's face. Few people have ever praised her like that. Who says no one likes her? She glanced at Pete, who had previously said she was jealous of Kayla, and opened her mouth to say something. Chloe, you haven't had a drop of alcohol, you've just been warming yourself by the fire, and you've managed to get yourself passed out. David suddenly spoke. Teenagers often act impulsively without considering the consequences. Stay away. He looked at Sean and said only 3 words. Sean's eyes darted away. He had heard that David had single-handedly taken down Whitney and his men. He raised his hands in surrender. All right. With no hope of getting a girl, he had no choice but to turn around and leave dejectedly, going to play rugby by the lake with some friends who had come to greet him. Actually, I just wanted to give him my phone number and get rid of him. After Sean left, Chloe, having calmed down, turned to her friends who were watching her, her face flushed, and tried to save face. I'm not stupid. David shrugged. Let's assume you're telling the truth. Chloe felt a pang of embarrassment, but in the end she still thanked David and Pete, understanding their good intentions. Clark watched silently from the side, pondering something. When family members are threatened, she gets angry and ignites the fury of enemies. When friends are in trouble, she offers help and makes them feel warm and comforted. Is her own younger brother really gradually placing her above others in his heart? Is being ruthless towards the enemy a mistake? He shook his head violently at the question. I can't think about it anymore. If I do, I feel like my own beliefs will be changed by my younger brother first. David looked at Clark with a puzzled expression, watching him stare blankly for a moment and shake his head for a moment, wondering what was wrong with him. Lakeside. The pizza I ordered has arrived. Sean, catch. Hearing that the pizza was coming, a rugby player threw a rugby ball, which Sean jumped over but still managed to get past. Sean's rugby ball flew and landed on the ice 7 or 8 meters away. Seeing that everyone else was eating pizza, he angrily went to retrieve the ball. On the cold, hard, and slippery ice, Sean had just picked up the ball when suddenly a crisp sound rang out. Caca. What sound? Sean felt as if he had been soaked in cold water, trembling all over as he looked down. Cracks appeared on the ice beneath his feet, and he dared not make any rash moves, just about to shout. Save! The ice shattered, and he fell into the icy lake water. After struggling, he left his original position, but Sean was unable to break through the ice. He drowned and suffocated, and soon became still. His hands and feet stopped moving and he sank to the bottom of the lake. The green light shone dimly in the silt at the bottom of the lake. A large amount of meteorite has accumulated together. Upon landing on the meteorite and in the cold lake water, the veins on Sean's body bulged and turned green. Some astonishing change was quietly taking place. Several rugby players were enjoying a steaming hot pizza, oblivious to Sean's presence. The dealer gets 12.5%, 6 months' worth of feed costs is 5%, plus 8.2% of the mortgage, plus the cost of repairing the hay shredder. Early in the morning, Martha and Jonathan frowned as they used a calculator to tally up their income and expenses over the past 6 months. 54,501 yuan. Clark listened for a few seconds, then used his calculator to arrive at the answer first. Upon hearing about the cost of repairing the lawnmower, he awkwardly scratched his face. If I hadn't recklessly stuck my hand into the lawnmower that day, we could have saved thousands of yuan in repair costs. Now let's calculate the profits. Jonathan didn't scold his eldest son, but gently took the bill. David glanced at the remaining ledgers, before Jonathan could even start using the calculator. The income is 67,357 yuan. It sounds like our farm earned over 10,000 in just 6 months last year? He raised an eyebrow. The couple put down the bills and calculators, unfazed, and let out a sigh of relief. Martha smiled as she looked at her 2 sons, who had been exceptionally intelligent since childhood. At least there was no compensation, right? Besides, the 2 of you are the most precious treasures in our family. These are not your concerns. Didn't you make a promise with Pete to do community service? Go on. Jonathan waved his hand, shooing away his 2 sons who hadn't yet gone to college. The burdens of life should not fall on the shoulders of 2 students. We arrived at the nursing home in the small town. Room 206 needs a service staff member. Please report to room 206. A sound came from the radio. Each student was required to perform 30 hours of community service, and David was no exception. The 3 of them went to the nursing home together and received their assignments. A pretty, black-haired girl in a magenta dress turned and walked out of a room, pushing a cart full of books. Hi, Lana, what a coincidence, you're here too. Clark waved and greeted him, pretending it was a chance encounter, but his voice lingered, sounding a little nervous. Are you volunteering here too? It's been a while. Lana greeted the 3 of them and smiled calmly. What tasks have you been assigned? I need to read with Cassandra. David and Pete remained silent, giving Clark the opportunity to talk to Lana. David's task was to play chess with an old lady. Cassandra? She's interesting. Lana smiled, a hint of amusement in her expression. The caregivers all say she can predict the future, from things that will happen in a few minutes to things that will happen in a lifetime. Have you tried it, Lana? Hearing Clark's question, Lana didn't speak, just shrugged, clearly not believing it, and then pushed her cart away to deliver books to the next elderly person. Predict future. Pete didn't react much, David raised an eyebrow, and Clark focused more on Lana's departing figure. Rustling. Inside the room, an elderly woman with white hair and a kind face, wearing blindfolds, was reading a braille book with her hands. Don't stand there. This is the first time I've had 3 people accompany me while I study. Please come in. She suddenly spoke. The 3 men, Clark and his companion, looked at each other at the door. Joy from Cassandra +1, +1.2. David's eyes flickered as he secretly sized up the old woman. He is indeed a person with great abilities, and quite strong ones at that, but it's unclear whether he can foresee the future. But does this old lady really need someone to accompany her in her studies? How can someone accompany someone in learning Braille? Page 33. How did you know there were 3 of us? Pete entered the house, puzzled. My eyes may be blind, but my ears are not deaf. Cassandra's answer, delivered in a weathered voice, did not completely dispel Pete's doubts. Could a blind person really have such good hearing? Cassandra took off her blindfold and accidentally dropped the book from her lap. Pete, who was standing in front of the 2, stepped forward to help pick it up, and accidentally touched the old lady's hand. What is your name, sir? The old lady calmly put the book down and asked a question. Peter Ross. Mr. Ross, your journey home today is going to be long. Take a look at your pockets. Cassandra gave a mysterious smile. Pete reached into his pocket and realized his car keys were missing. He had no idea where he'd lost them. I'll be going now. It seems I won't be able to do my volunteer work today. You 2 brothers take care of yourselves. He glanced at the old woman in surprise, a look of utter despair flashing across his face, and said to the 2 of them. After Pete left. Are you 2 brothers? Cassandra looked at the 2 of them, stood up from her chair, and, not at all like someone who was blind, precisely turned her face toward them with a kind smile. What are your names, gentlemen? The update is a bit late, I wrote an extra 1,000 words. Please continue reading. 29 From chapter 29 onwards, live a quiet life, Luther. Under bright sunlight. Near the tranquil lake by the forest, the aftermath of last night's party left only a mess. Bang! A hand suddenly broke through the thick ice, like the zombie hand emerging from the lake in a terrifying legend. His skin was ice blue, like a corpse frozen to death by ice and snow. A figure climbed out of the lake and staggered to the river bank. He was soaking wet and shivering, looking exactly like someone who had fallen into an icy lake and climbed out, except for the fact that he had been lying in the lake all night. Sean sat on the ground, shivering, his eyebrows covered in ice crystals, and lit a campfire with an abandoned lighter. He stretched out his frozen hands to warm them by the fire. But the flames, containing astonishing heat, were absorbed remotely, and the newly lit firewood turned into a pile of ice. The intense chill emanating from him dissipated, and the icy blue color of his skin faded. As if he had come back to life, Sean looked at his hands in disbelief. His mind, which had been slightly frozen, began to work again, and it seemed as if something incredible had happened to him. He clenched his fist, feeling better than ever before, frighteningly strong. Having recovered his health, he prepared to go home, but as soon as he stepped out of the woods, that extreme cold swept over him again. Ice crystals formed on his eyebrows as Sean trembled and waved to passing cars for help. Laugh. Child, what's wrong? The car stopped, and an older man got out. I helped him up with concern, but my body stiffened. The next instant, his body heat was sucked away like a tide, and he turned into an ice sculpture, crashing straight onto the hard road and shattering into a pile of bloody ice shards. Sean's cold condition improved, and at the same time, his strength increased. He reached out and easily lifted the car as if it were a plastic toy. He instantly realized something, looked in a certain direction of the town, and, like a greedy gold prospector who had just found a piece of gold dust and then saw a mountain of gold, his eyes flashed with unprecedented excitement and fervor, and he couldn't help but swallow. That place is a thermal power plant. Beep. The heavy wool curtains were drawn, blocking out the sunlight. The flames burned quietly in the fireplace. Luther took a sip of whiskey, his throat burning, but his face remained expressionless. He browsed through old news articles and posts on forums by the townspeople on his computer, just like he did when he was working. There were stacks of US dollars on the table next to him. Click. The door was opened by the servant. A middle-aged man in a trench coat walked in, his eyes flashing with shrewdness from time to time. He was slightly balding, giving him an impression of being intelligent and capable. He held a brown paper file folder in his hand, slapping his thigh leisurely. "Mr. Luther, have you prepared the money I asked for?" "Roger Nixon, if I remember correctly." Luther slowly stood up, poured a glass of clear, brown liquid into it, handed it to him, and smiled. "A reporter from the Metropolitan Inquirer? You said you had something you wanted to show me. This photo caused our sales to skyrocket." Nixon took a newspaper out of the file folder. The newspaper featured a prominent printed photo of Lex Luthor, holding a pistol, fleeing the bank after robbing it. "That's all in the past." Luthor chuckled. "I don't think Mr. Nixon, as a journalist, is unaware of the latest developments in the bank robbery. That's how news is, it can easily become outdated. It's very difficult to consistently get your articles to make headlines." Nick shook his head. "Mr. Luther, have you ever dug potatoes before?" Before Luther could answer, he stared into Luther's eyes, as if he had the situation firmly under control, and smiled smugly. "I imagine someone like you, born with a silver spoon in your mouth, probably doesn't realize that when you're digging potatoes, one potato can easily bring up a whole bunch." Nixon waved the file folder in his hand and handed it over, seemingly with a sigh. "It's so thick, almost like a stack of banknotes, all of which are your criminal records from when you were a minor. It's really surprising. It seems the reporter wasn't lying to me on the phone, he really does have some understanding of my wild youth." After taking the file and flipping through it, Luther's voice was low, and a smile appeared on his face. "Thank you very much, Mr. Nixon." "Thanks?" Nixon asked, puzzled. What was he supposed to thank him for? Was he being blackmailed? "This place is full of destroyed electronic records and sealed archives. How did you find it, sir?" He walked back to his desk, sat down slowly, and began to ask questions. "It's easy to imagine that your father must have spent a lot of money to cover up these files. I'm not as rich as your father, but luckily bribing a guard in a dusty archive room doesn't cost much." Nixon scoffed, thanking the vacant guard who had a penny to his name for bringing him this windfall. "Think about what the effect would be if these things were published. It has just been discovered that the wrongly accused heir to the Luthor Group actually had a long history of misconduct in his youth, and robbing a bank was nothing out of the ordinary. In my experience as a journalist, people love plot twists and turns." He put down his glass, shrugged, glanced furtively at the brand new $100,000 bill still smelling of ink on the table, and began to speak eloquently. "This will likely have some impact on Luthor Group's stock price. Mr. Nixon, this money is yours." Luther smiled calmly and took a black cloth bag from under the table. "Mr. Luther, you're also responsible for providing the bags." Nixon was somewhat surprised and put the stacks of money on the table into his bag. "You must be feeling great right now." Page 34. Luther remained unperturbed as he watched Luther pocket the money he had extorted from him. "It feels good to beat the famous Luther father and son." After putting the money away, he said something that sounded like an adult scolding a child, then turned and left with a smile, his hand about to touch the doorknob. "This is the only copy I'm giving you. From now on, behave yourself, Lex Luthor. If you walk out of this door now, I guarantee you will immediately vanish from this world." Luther put down his glass and, with a smile, uttered something chilling. "What do you want? To kill me for this little bit of money?" Nixon turned around and asked dismissively. "Trying to blackmail a billionaire heir? Did you think I wouldn't be prepared? If he doesn't go back on time, his email will automatically send reports to major newspapers. And is $100,000 really worth Luther killing someone? He wasn't greedy, he only asked for a small amount. No, you will live a good life. But there is no longer any evidence of your existence in the world." He shook his head. "What are you saying? Driver's license, passport, bank account, even tax records, all gone." Continuing to browse the news on his computer, Luther spoke casually, as if he were talking about a trivial matter. One phone call, and there's no longer any evidence that you ever lived. Mr. Luther, are you trying to scare me? Call the bank to see if your account is still active. Seeing someone who doubted the common sense that the sun rises every day, Luther looked up at him. If you still have your phone number. He took out his phone, wanting to make a call, but Nixon couldn't dial the number no matter how many times he tried. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead, his face turned panicked, and his voice became shrill with tension. How did you do that? Chapter 30, Trouble, Madam. Don't worry, Mr. Jack. In the manor office, Luther leaned forward, his arms crossed, like a prehistoric crocodile finally revealing its gaping maw, and sneered, "A wonderful new life awaits you. I'm called Nixon. That's in the past. I'll give you a new identity. Your surname will be Jack. What should your given name be? Baker? Benson? Maybe we should just call him Johnson." His tone was as if he were deciding what to eat for lunch, freely weaving the future of his life. Nixon felt as if he had fallen into an abyss, a chill running down his spine. What profession do you have? Assassin, drug dealer, gangster, or terrorist? They all have identities that inevitably lead to being wanted for murder. Listen, I can give you your money back. He swallowed hard and quickly put the bag on the table. Family, work, friends, he couldn't accept that everything he had built up in the first half of his life had left him. Was my money like this from the beginning? Luther raised an eyebrow in surprise. Nixon hurriedly and nervously took out the money from the bag, stacking it back in its place. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, looking at Luther with a tense and fearful expression, as if he were looking at a devil whose words could decide his life and death. He gave Luther an ugly smile. "Mr. Luther. You think you can blackmail me? Do you think I'm some spoiled brat who needs my protection?" Luther rose slowly and forcefully, his expression like that of a demon ready to devour its prey. His voice suddenly rose, making Nixon tremble and almost kneel down in fright. "You're not the first person to think that way. The person I made disappear has never appeared again. What kind of people do you think are in charge of this country? Mr. Luther, what do you want me to do?" As if facing a massive wave that could smash him into a pulp at any moment, Nixon was terrified and begged for mercy in a trembling voice. "You're one of the best reporters in the Metropolis, and your access to information about the grassroots is even better than mine. I need you to investigate some things for me covertly. Please say it. There is a family in this small town who run a farm named Kent." Luther turned and drew back the curtains, letting in light, but it couldn't illuminate his dark eyes. "I need their information, down to the smallest detail." "I will." Nixon nodded eagerly in agreement, "I will definitely take care of it for you. Besides, anything else, Mr. Luther?" Seeing Luther turn around and glance at him, he quickly lowered his head, like a loyal servant. "This is a magical town." Luther's lips curled into a smile as he looked out at the manor again and spoke softly. "Although I only stayed for a few days, I saw a corner of her mysterious veil, which made me yearn for her. First, there's Clark, who was hit off a bridge by a sports car traveling at 200 miles per hour but escaped unharmed and even had his life saved. Then, a high school girl, who somehow managed to transform into his appearance to rob a bank. And then there were the strange things circulating in the small town that he had just seen online. I want to know everything about her mystery." "You will get your wish, Mr. Luther." After dismissing the reporter he had just taken in as a dog, Luther watched him drive away, slowly took a sip of his drink, and chuckled softly. "Thank you, Nixon. Fortunately, it was someone as foolish and cowardly as you who discovered one of my vulnerabilities beforehand, rather than some other, more troublesome guy. And you just happened to be there when I was short-handed. What are your names, gentlemen?" "In the nursing home, Cassandra, with her white-haired hair and cataracts, smiled kindly. "My name is Clark. David Kent." Clark gave his name first, and David followed suit. "The Kent brothers. Move over a bit." The gentle-looking old woman pointed to the bed not far away. "Madam, I've heard that you can foresee the future." The two sat down. Clark glanced at his younger brother, believing that after encountering several ability users, he now shared the same thoughts as him. He turned his head and hesitated for a moment before finally asking, "Is it true? Who wouldn't be curious about the future? Especially knowing that this prediction of the future might not be fake. When it first happened, I thought it was a curse, a hallucination. Whenever I have physical contact with someone, uncontrollable scenes of events flash before my eyes." Cassandra laughed. "Later I realized it was a gift from God to make up for me." Clark was surprised. The old woman in front of me seemed completely unconcerned about hiding her abilities, speaking casually to someone she was meeting for the first time. He began to have some doubts. Was the other person really an ability user? Only liars are eager to show off and talk eloquently. Page 35. But what happened with Pete just now proved something amazing. "Clark, stop thinking about rude things." Unlike Clark, David was certain that the other party could most likely foresee the future, and said slowly, "I think when you reach Ms. Cassandra's age, you will be able to take some things in stride." Upon closer inspection, the old woman did indeed exude a sense of serene composure that comes with the passage of time. Clark realized this and quickly apologized. "I'm sorry, Ms. Cassandra." "It's all right," the old woman said with a smile, seemingly unconcerned. "When was the first time you had a premonition?" Clark had a persistent suspicion that all the strange things that seemed to happen in the town occurred after the meteor shower. He had a strong feeling that those people with special abilities might be related to the meteorite, but he had no evidence to confirm it. "One morning, I woke up as usual, and then a meteorite fell and hit the wheat field in front of my house. The doctor determined that the flash burned my optic nerve, which changed my life in a short moment." "I'm sorry." Looking at the old woman calmly recounting her past, Clark's expression was unnatural, and his voice was somber. "Meteor showers accompanied him, he brought disaster and changed the lives of many. It's not your fault, child." Cassandra thought he was apologizing for making her bring up her blindness, and laughed. "Kindness is a good thing." Seeing the guilt in Clark's eyes, David said meaningfully, "But there are some things in this world that you can't control, my brother. He was forced to come to Earth, not that he chose to come here. Don't keep taking on the burden yourself." Clark felt a little better after being comforted by his brother. At the same time, he was a little puzzled as to why his younger brother would comfort him over such a trivial matter. "Since then, I can no longer see my own present, but I can glimpse the future of others." As she spoke, she gently extended her hand. "Kid, would you like to try?" Looking at the old man in front of him, Clark hesitated. Would activating that ability consume his stamina or something? "I came here to volunteer and read to the elderly, not to have them answer my questions about the future." Meanwhile, outside the room, a tall, beautiful figure with black hair walked silently, like a hunter skilled in stealth in the jungle, quietly approaching the door, her back against the wall, listening inside. "Occasionally, we can glimpse the light again, only in the future of others." David pondered for a moment. "Is that why you often help people predict the future and offer guidance, Ms. Cassandra?" It's clear that this old woman has an inexplicable enthusiasm for helping people predict the future. "Child, you are very smart." Cassandra nodded approvingly in his direction. "The world is so beautiful, colorful, with clouds as white as cotton, beautiful green lawns, an azure sky. Light is always better than darkness, especially for someone who once had sight." She spoke with a nostalgic tone. Upon hearing this, Clark no longer hesitated and reached out his hand to the kind, blind old woman in front of him. "I'm sorry to trouble you, Ma'am. The update is a bit late, I wrote an extra 400 or 500 words. Chapter 31. The future Clark saw. Clark reached out and touched the old woman's wrinkled hand. A few seconds later, his vision blurred. It felt like a completely different world had appeared before my eyes. A scene of utter catastrophe unfolded, with a blood-red sunset shrouding the sky. High-rise buildings were pierced through, houses collapsed, and fires raged, with thick black smoke billowing into the sky like pillars. The crowd scattered and fled, the desperate cries of thousands of people sounding like the echoes of hell. A deep ravine, like a giant finger pointing to the sky, ripped across Clark's body. He felt a sharp pain, as if he had been struck by a meteorite. He lay at the end of the ravine, his body unable to move, struggling to lift his head. Call out! A black-haired man, dressed in a black battle suit with mysterious dark gold patterns, with a strong and slender body, slowly descended from the sky. Half a meter above the ground, the pebbles on the ground seemed to spontaneously rise up and surround him as if they were celestial bodies. Its overwhelming aura was like that of a majestic deity descending to earth, making it hard for people to breathe. David. Seeing such a horrific scene, and then seeing his brother who was both strange and familiar, Clark was utterly shocked. He felt as if he were in a dream, only able to watch, unable to control anything, unable even to speak, with only a limited perspective. Clark, look around. David's eyes still held a lingering red light, like lava, and he shook his head slightly. I didn't want to do this, but you were so disobedient that you forced me to do it. What do you mean? Clark was shocked and puzzled. Had David done all of this? Thoughts flashed through his mind. He refused to submit to David, and David fought him and destroyed the city. Wait a minute, this looks like the Metropolis. Clark recognized him. In the distance, atop the Daily Planet building, the iconic Golden Globe statue appears to have been used as a weapon, smashing through several buildings and falling to the ground. Could it be that my fears have come true? David has lost his way with power and gone down the path of evil, and I've stood against him to stop him. He was confused and confused. As if to verify Clark's idea, he felt an endless anger rising in his heart in the future, and the anger in his eyes was like a volcano about to erupt. Little brother, you need to be corrected. In the future, he roared with overwhelming force and icy fury as he leaped up, punching his younger brother like a god charging at an opposing god. Swish! A golden rope, as fast as lightning, flew over in an instant and wrapped around his waist. Almost simultaneously, several green chains, seemingly made of green crystal, coiled around his body like snakes, and several huge nails pinned the chains to the ground, preventing him from moving forward. His momentum was abruptly halted as he was violently pulled back. The body, which had been hurtling like a cannonball, came to a stop, only creating a shockwave that spread outwards. They were just a few dozen centimeters apart, about to collide face to face, but David hovered in midair without even blinking. You're the one who needs to be taught a lesson, my brother. Who helped David? Clark was puzzled. The future Clark angrily turned his head to look, and saw a figure as heroic and beautiful as a female war goddess, wearing a crown and armored battle dress, kicking the ground and tightly gripping the rope that emitted golden light. On the other side, a brown-haired man wearing a green glowing bodysuit, whose usually casual smile was now filled with seriousness, was flying in mid-air. A ring on his hand, resembling an emerald, was emitting light as he struggled to keep the manifested chains and nails from being torn apart. The two gritted their teeth, struggling to utter a single word, barely managing to grasp the future Clark, who resembled a raging bull. David's helper. Clark was startled. Are they David's ally in his evil deeds? Or his henchman? Bang! Before he could think it through, David appeared before him like lightning, slamming his fist down like a meteorite and knocking him back to the ground. In the future, Clark's body crashed into a crater several meters deep, and the surging force, like a raging tidal wave, spread through several streets, causing the surrounding buildings to shake violently and their windows to shatter. Snapped. How to do? A deep, resonant voice came through. A grappling hook was anchored to the building wall, and a strange, bat-like shadow swung over. Page 36. He spread his black, bat-wing-like cloak and landed steadily on the ground. His cold expression kept strangers at bay, and his dark aura was like the thick, never-dispersing clouds over Gotham City in Legends, making people feel unconsciously oppressed and fearful. Clark initially doubted the reality of these future events, wondering if his brother had truly embarked on a dark path, but suddenly the scales in his heart began to tip. He examined him closely and realized that this bat-like monster didn't seem like a good person at all, as if it were inherently isolated from light. Are the people he hangs out with good people? Clark, our parents would be heartbroken if they saw this. David frowned and raised his hand, as if preparing to do something. Click. The screen suddenly shattered. Clark's consciousness returned to reality, and the shocked Cassandra turned her head to look at him. Cassandra opened her eyes, as if anticipating the end of the future, but immediately looked at herself in surprise, while David looked puzzled. Why look at yourself this way, instead of looking at the future related to Clark? Did he see himself looking like an alien in Clark's future? David, you. Clark, who had just returned to reality, suddenly stood up. A tall, robust chimney, tens of meters in diameter, stands on the ground. The tiny figure, Sean, withdrew his palm from above with rapt attention. At his feet, a dozen factory workers turned into ice sculptures, their faces filled with terror. Frost covered and froze the entire enormous chimney. The alternation between cold and returning to normalcy, and each time he absorbs enough heat, his strength will reach a new level. A feeling similar to being overstuffed came over him, and Sean stopped what he was doing. He now felt incredibly powerful. He glanced excitedly at the dozen or so dented brass bullets on the ground. The bullets had already hit him so badly that he couldn't even scratch an itch. He couldn't imagine how powerful he was now. He picked up a crowbar from the ground that a worker patrolling the power plant had been using as a weapon. Crunch! A tooth-grinding sound. The crowbar was twisted into a pretzel by the terrifying force. It's not the limit yet. Sean pressed down on the twisted crowbar with both hands and exerted great force, causing steel like mud to seep out between his fingers. Upon seeing this, he was overjoyed and burst into uncontrollable laughter. Modern world civilization is almost entirely built on steel, there is almost nothing in the world harder than steel. He is now powerful enough to shake the entire world, and even the police can't control him. From then on, the town became his playground, where he could do whatever he wanted. Where should we begin? Go find a pretty girl and ask her if she'd like to experience the strength of your steel arms. Do not. A figure flashed through Sean's mind. David. Yesterday, that guy only gave him a look and said one sentence, and he ran away. He uttered a name with resentment. You think you're so great at fighting? Thinking about how he had left in fear and embarrassment in front of them yesterday, Sean, who had originally stopped thinking about the shameful incident, was now filled with uncontrollable anger and humiliation. He gritted his teeth and said, I am no longer the person I used to be. A few rugby players are nothing, he can now take on an entire heavily armed army by himself. Leaving behind a field of lifeless ice sculptures, Sean clenched his fist and left the power plant, his face grim as he headed toward Kent Farm. I promise you'll regret treating me like that, David. Chapter 32. People who can't see the future. What's wrong with me? David looked at the two astonished people in the room and asked Clark in bewilderment. What do you see? Cassandra might understand, since she hadn't seen his abilities. But why did Clark look so surprised and frightened? You. Clark hesitated, his face showing struggle. Should we tell my younger brother? David, knowing how he would react to this future, was reminded that he must not become like the future, so he simply indulged himself and slid into darkness. "Did you see that too, child?" Upon hearing Clark's voice, the blind Cassandra turned her head toward Clark, who reacted with surprise, her voice filled with astonishment. "Shouldn't I have seen this?" Clark hesitated. "No one has ever seen this before," Cassandra shook her head. "She uses her ability to foresee the future of others, but only she herself can see the future. Just like Mr. Ross who lost his car keys earlier, he needs me to point it out so that he can know what I predicted. But this time it's different." Why? We all know that you are different from others." Clark, whose mind was almost blank from the shock of what had happened, finally remembered in a panic that his abilities had been exposed and that his younger brother had also been found to be different from others. "Don't be afraid, Clark." Cassandra smiled gently as she saw Clark's face in the foreseeable future. "I just realized that I've actually met you before." "Has the lady seen me before?" Clark asked, puzzled. When the old woman went blind, Clark was just an infant who arrived on Earth with a meteor shower. David's expression changed slightly, and he vaguely guessed where the other party meant by seen. Cassandra paused abruptly, smiled mysteriously, and then said, "Child, go and close the door." A puzzled Clark walked toward the door. A dark-haired figure, pressed against the wall near the door, heard the sounds coming from inside and quickly left. Clark turned around and closed the door that Pete had casually closed when he left. He returned to the bedside but did not sit back down next to his brother. "Why are you looking at me like that, Clark?" Seeing the complex look in Clark's eyes, David wondered what he had seen in the future, and chuckled lightly, pretending not to care. Worry from Clark +32, panic +30, fear +25. He wasn't particularly interested in the future. He doesn't really need anyone to tell him what his fate will be. But seeing Clark's reaction, he couldn't help but be curious. Is Clark's current mood, like a super-enhanced version of his previous worry that I would go down the path of depravity? David's eyes flickered, and he keenly guessed what Clark might have seen. But I still don't understand, how could his future turn out like Clark's fears? The black-haired girl appeared from around the corner, frowned slightly as she looked at the closed door of the house, and was about to quietly go back inside. "Kayla!" Suddenly a clear voice rang out from behind. Page 37. "What a coincidence, I didn't expect to run into you here." Lana pushed her cart past, looking surprised. She hadn't expected to see a friend she'd just met at the party yesterday. "Are you here to volunteer as well?" Kayla turned around, a slightly unnatural smile on her face. Yes. Some things are the same even when I'm a new transfer student, such as 30 hours of community service per semester." Lana started chatting with Kayla. But then she became a little puzzled, wondering why Kayla had been so talkative just yesterday. The two chatted happily, and Kayla asked her a lot of questions about the town's high school, asking her to introduce the famous people in the school so she could get a general impression. Kayla, however, seemed somewhat distracted, her gaze drifting to one side every now and then. "You will be an amazing person in the future." In the room, Cassandra laughed. In other people's future, some people will encounter pain and despair, but when you appear, hope will come and all disasters will disappear. David's eyes flashed with surprise upon hearing Cassandra's words. It sounds like this old woman had indeed glimpsed the future of Clark, or Superman, in the future of others. I seem to have underestimated the elderly in this small town's nursing home. If she could see the future Superman, perhaps she wouldn't understand the future of this world as well as I do. But perhaps we can also grasp some scattered clues about the future world. Me? Amazing. Clark pointed at himself, utterly bewildered. Although he knew he was exceptionally talented, he never thought he could deserve such praise. You seem to have been born for this, child. To help everyone escape fear and darkness. Facing Clark's confusion and anxiety about the future, Cassandra spoke softly and meaningfully. After helping people predict the future so many times, I've come up with a pattern. Do you know what it is? Madam, what is it? Clark asked respectfully. Seeing such a scene, she could recover from her initial shock and return to normal as if nothing in the world could make her lose her composure. The future can be changed. A mysterious smile appeared on her lips. In fact, the future has already changed from now on. Just like Pete. David spoke slowly. Once people know their future, they will certainly not allow themselves or things to develop in a way they do not want. Yes, kid. The old woman spoke to David with the same kind tone, even though she had seen him in the future, perhaps as an enemy of Clark. She has seen many future lives. Humans are complex beings, do not make hasty judgments about a person or their future. Perhaps an unremarkable child growing up on a small town farm will become the most dazzling and beloved person on the planet in the future, perhaps a respected and promising prosecutor will, after just one bad day, transform into a fearsome gangster. Perhaps even mercenaries who are usually driven by money and ruthless will disregard reward and do their utmost to save the world. Now, it's your turn, child. Cassandra gently opened her hand to David. David hesitated for a moment, then quickly reached out his hand as well. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. A long time passed, and nothing happened. Just when David thought that he wasn't special like the other children of tomorrow who could see his future together. The special Kent brothers. Cassandra, who had been keeping her eyes closed, opened her eyes, which were filled with white film, and sighed. Child, I cannot see your future. This is something that has never happened before. It seems I can't offer you any guidance for your life. She shook her head. Your future is up to you to grasp and create. The two brothers, one who can see the future she sees, and the other who cannot see the future. Cannot see. David was puzzled upon learning the answer. Thanos's physique has great resistance to mental abilities, so does that mean that foresight also falls under the category of mental abilities? That's why we can't see it. Clark, who was initially on edge and hoping to see if things would turn around by looking at his brother's future, was suddenly taken aback. He gritted his teeth, firmly believing in his heart that no matter what happened, he would never let his younger brother go astray. Clark opened his eyes, his voice slightly apprehensive. Madam, could you please tell me about my future as well? Cassandra may be blind in her eyes, but she is not blind in her mind. She guessed what he wanted to do and shook her head helplessly. Child, I am not a radio that you can answer anytime, change channels at will, or see whichever part of your future you want to read. The update is a bit late, I added an extra 400 words. Please continue reading. Chapter 33 Ignorance Leads to the Grave. Cassandra predicts the future will be out of control. Sometimes you can see what will happen a few minutes from now, sometimes you can see the end of someone's life, but you can't frequently predict a person's ever-changing future. Clark wanted to predict his own future to see if his firm resolve to prevent his brother from going astray had worked, and whether the future would change, but he couldn't. I'm tired, children. Listening to the ticking of the clock, Cassandra smiled with satisfaction. Clark was somewhat puzzled, as he had not yet begun reading with this respectable elder before him. You don't really think Ms. Cassandra needs someone to help her with her studies, do you? David patted him on the shoulder, got up, and left. This old woman can read Braille, all she needs is someone to help her see the vibrant and colorful world again in the future. Excuse me, ma'am. Clark realized what was happening, glanced at the clock on the wall, and, feeling that he had been in a lot of trouble, said goodbye and left. I'll come see you again this afternoon. My child, I can only help you see fragments of the future. Sometimes you don't know the whole story, so don't make hasty judgments. Finally, Cassandra sat kindly in her chair and reminded Clark, who was about to close the door and leave. Be more patient and trusting with your family. I understand, thank you, ma'am. Clark paused for a moment, his eyes deep in thought, then nodded and closed the door. He had intended to accompany David to a room downstairs to play chess with another elderly person and spend his community service time. But after 2 games, the old woman didn't want to play anymore because she could tell that David was letting her win and trying to make her happy. After letting him win 1 game, she quickly lost badly. Playing chess against someone whose skill level is too far below yours is a very boring experience, especially for the weaker player. You guys go ahead, I'll tell the hospital that you played chess with me. Feeling a sense of frustration, the old man rubbed his forehead and waved his hand. The two had no choice but to leave. Seeing that it was almost lunchtime, they preferred to go home and taste their mother Martha's specialty seafood chowder rather than eat in the nursing home cafeteria. When I went downstairs, I saw Pete's car parked downstairs. But I didn't see Pete, I don't know where he went, maybe he's still looking for his keys. Page 38. Are you going to go home looking like this, Clark? What will my father and mother think when they see this? As Clark left the nursing home, a lingering worry remained between his brows, and he walked absent-mindedly. David lifted his eyelids and smiled. What did you see me do in the future that made you so worried? Locked you in a coffin made of meteorite? Or did you steal Lana, whom you've always wanted? No. Nothing. You can't even fool a child with that. David's tone was slightly exasperated as he faced the Kryptonian son, who was not very good at lying. Let me think about it before I decide whether to tell you, David. Clark was unsure whether telling his brother what he had seen would be beneficial or harmful, and decided to take some time to think about it. He glanced back at the nursing home. He had come here today hoping to spend some time with Lana, perhaps chatting in the cafeteria, but given what has happened, he's lost that interest for now. Anyway, it's your future. David shrugged, not pressing for further questions. Curiosity aside, he wouldn't be preoccupied with the future as predicted by someone with superpowers. The future is at his feet, in his hands, he is steering his own life. Where the ship of life sails is up to you. There are quite a few people in this world who have the ability to foresee the future and make predictions. If someone says something casually that makes them anxious and insecure, they won't have time to do anything else in the future. Compared to that, I'm more concerned about something else now. Walking down the street, David shook hands with Clark, who was lost in thought beside him. Since the template reached a fusion level of over 90%, he felt a powerful energy flowing through his body, filling every cell. The higher the fusion level, the greater the energy became. But no matter what I do, I can't release it. This inevitably brings to mind Thanos from the comics. In the comics, Thanos can fire powerful cosmic energy from his hands or eyes, but he couldn't do it at first. Not long after Thanos left his home planet Titan and embarked on the path of the Dark Lord, he killed the leader of the space pirates and took his place. He then led his crew of space pirates to plunder science and technology from the universe to study his own body. To fully unleash his body's potential, Thanos created a suit of armor for himself and underwent biomodification surgery to allow him to release the powerful energy within his body. In the comics, Thanos's golden armor appears simple, as if it were hammered, but it actually contains various cutting-edge technologies from the universe, one of which is to help him concentrate and release energy. David knew that he should be modeled after the movie Thanos. But Thanos is Thanos, and some of his essential qualities will not change. He guessed in his mind. In the movie, Thanos may be so engrossed in finding the Infinity Stones and being the head of his cosmic family planning office that he has no time to explore his own potential. Even without energy beams, Thanos's powerful physique is enough to dominate the universe. Even if he found the Infinity Stones that could control the universe, his ability to emit energy wouldn't make it any easier for him to snap his fingers. David shook his head, unsure what to do with the energy within his body. He currently lacks the resources to create a high-tech cosmic armor set and to perform biological modifications on himself. This extra ability doesn't seem to be of much use for the time being. On his way home from the suburbs, David raised an eyebrow. What a coincidence, David! A voice filled with resentment and smugness suddenly rang out. A figure slowly emerged from the crossroads, suddenly blocking the two people's path. His skin was covered in ice and snow, his lips were bluish-purple, and his face looked somewhat ferocious. I was crossing the town on my way to your farm, but I never expected to run into you here. Shein. Clark looked up at Sean, whose skin was an abnormal color and who seemed to be trembling, and asked in surprise, "Are you all right? Are you okay?" Upon hearing this question, Sean spread his arms wide and laughed wildly, "I couldn't be better. Now." He glared at David, his voice sharp and menacing. The grass on either side of his hands was frozen and shattered, and when the wind blew, snowflakes danced in the air. "Kneel down and beg me, and I might consider sparing your life, David." As he walked through the town and arrived here, his ability to absorb heat resurfaced. "Have you considered applying for a job at the circus?" Upon hearing this, David's face turned cold. Judging from Sean's appearance, it's easy to see that he suffered from genetic mutations caused by kryptonite radiation. With your current freakish appearance, the theater would definitely be packed. Your ignorance will lead you to your grave. Enraged by the mockery, Sean leaped up and threw a punch. "You have no idea how powerful I am now." "Sean, stop right there!" Clark lunged forward to stop Sean from getting close to David, both to protect his brother and to protect him. But as soon as their hands touched Sean's body, his body heat was uncontrollably drawn away. A ray of sunlight was born at the point where the two made contact and was absorbed into Sean's body. How can the heat inside your body be greater than that of a small thermal power plant? A surge of heat rushed into his body, and Sean's physique rapidly improved. His eyes widened, and he exclaimed in disbelief. "I am becoming stronger." Chapter 34. Don't go near those brothers. What? With a low, painful groan, Clark felt all his strength being rapidly drained away. He collapsed to the ground, his body covered in ice strong enough to shatter steel, his consciousness blurred, shivering uncontrollably. Court death. David kicked off the ground, his body shooting out like a cannonball towards Sean, and with a terrifying force like a volcanic eruption, he punched Sean in the chest. Bang! A deafening explosion erupted, followed by a visible, violent white shockwave. Like a raging storm, it swept across dozens of meters. Click, click, click. As if struck squarely in the chest by a high-speed train traveling at 400 km per hour, Sean felt a sharp pain in his chest, flew backward, and carved a long trench in the ground, embedding himself deeply into the earth dozens of meters away. "Clark, how are you feeling?" David frowned and asked quickly. Under the sun, and without dying, Clark's physical condition shouldn't be a problem. I'm fine." Under the sun's rays, Clark's face, which had turned purple from the cold, improved rapidly, though he remained weak and seemed to need some time to recover. Looking at his caring younger brother, a warm feeling welled up in his heart. Clark suddenly remembered something. In the vision of the future, his younger brother could fly, had normal skin color, and his eyes would glow red. Was he really his younger brother? Could it be that Ms. Cassandra misactivated his ability on the alien, causing him to have bizarre hallucinations? "Brother, don't kill him, and don't." Clark opened his mouth, his teeth chattering from the cold. "I'll go avenge you right now." Before he finished speaking, with a powerful stomp on the ground, the force caused the hard asphalt to crack, and David's body was sent flying. He flew in an arc dozens of meters long, exuding a chilling aura, and crashed down in front of Sean, sending dirt flying from his feet. "Ignorance does lead to the grave, but not to me. You also gained abilities." Page 39. A deep voice, like a merciless judgment, slowly entered his ears. Sean painfully got up, saw the change in David's appearance, panicked and scrambled to his feet, swinging his fist to strike, but David easily dodged it by turning his head. Having just witnessed Clark's fate, he naturally knew what would happen if he were allowed to touch him physically. Can it absorb heat and become stronger? With a powerful kick, Sean was sent flying. This time, David used even more force. With a cracking sound, an immense force broke his ribs, sending him flying back into the pit, like a stone hitting a lake, creating waves and a deep crater several meters in diameter. David looked down at him. That's a pretty good ability, but you've wasted it. Many powerful ability users don't have much body heat combined. Even Clark, whose ability comes from the sun, would likely die instantly if touched by him. Some people, even if given great abilities, cannot hide their cowardly nature. Shut up! Enraged by the blatant mockery, Sean lunged out of the pit with the standard charging motion of a rugby player, creating a powerful gust of air as he crashed into David and grabbed him around the waist. Kneel down before me and beg for mercy. As he stomped forward, he roared and activated his power to absorb the heat from David's body. I thought David would collapse at the first sign of trouble. But David acted as if nothing had happened, bracing himself with his legs to create 2 deep grooves, and calmly punched Sean to the ground. The terrifying force accompanied Sean's body as he slammed into the ground, and a visible white shockwave sent surrounding gravel and grass flying. Click, click, click. The sound of bones shattering rang out. My back! In the pit several meters in diameter, Sean screamed in terror, writhing in excruciating pain. His face contorted in pain, his hands trembling as he reached for his back. He could feel nothing in his lower body. Don't worry, you'll be free from this pain soon. Feeling a slight loss of cosmic energy within him, David expressionlessly swung his fist down with the force of a crashing hill. Bang! Sean's eyes rolled back, and he lost consciousness. His brain was damaged, and he would be trapped in eternal nothingness and darkness. A weak and unsteady Clark staggered over and witnessed this scene. By the way, Clark, what were you trying to say just now? David retracted his fist and tilted his head slightly in the giant crater. Upon seeing Sean, who had become a vegetable, Clark was so angry that he almost fainted. Squeak! Excuse me, ma'am. The door opened, and Kayla, with her black hair, walked into the room, looking slightly nervous, her hands clasped tightly together. The people in this nursing home all say you can foresee the future. Can you help me? Cassandra sat on a stool eating, looking out the window and listening to the clear birdsong from the branches. With her eyes closed, she chewed slowly with each bite, her expression one of indescribable calm and serenity, as if she were enjoying the most delicious food in the world, or savoring the afterglow of life. Child, I am not an old gypsy witch. She opened her eyes, put down the spoon in her mouth, and said calmly, if you want to predict the future, I suggest you go to the circus's fortune-telling tent. Finally, here's a piece of life advice for you, young lady. She shook her head slightly. Eavesdropping on people is not a good habit. Please give me a chance, Ms. Cassandra. Upon hearing this, Kayla's eyes lit up, as if she had confirmed something, and she couldn't help but take a step forward, her voice tinged with excitement. Even without transforming, her agility was such that an ordinary blind old man shouldn't be able to hear her. It seems I said something wrong. Cassandra shook her head with some regret, her voice aged as she said, as people get older, their minds really do become less sharp. Time is running out. Can I have just a little bit of time left to leave quietly? Time is running out. Everyone dies eventually. Cassandra listened to the clock on the wall, which was about to strike the hour, and smiled faintly. I saw my own death in the futures of other caregivers. Some futures can be changed, while others are destined to be difficult to alter, such as the natural end of life. She was nearly 90 years old and had planned to take one last look at the world this morning before quietly passing away. But death should be peaceful and serene. The old man before her was in the final moments of his life, and she shouldn't disturb him. Kayla clenched her hands tightly, her beautiful face filled with remorse. This is not only important to me, but also to my people and the world. Please. I cannot reveal other people's futures without permission. Unable to resist the girl's pleading, the kind old man put down his rice spoon, shook his head, and suggested, "But I can help you see your future." My future? Kayla struggled for a moment, then realized that this was one way to do it. If Numa really does appear in this generation as predicted. According to the tribe's legend, she was destined to become entangled with Nama, who was born with heavenly fire, and was destined to become his woman. So perhaps through the future, she could determine which of the two brothers was the savior Namor and which was the evil Sekai, thus helping Namor defeat his brother. I'm sorry to trouble you, ma'am. This world is so beautiful, it's a good thing for me to take one last look before I leave. With only a few seconds left on the clock, Cassandra, with the girl's help, struggled back to bed, smiled, and grabbed the girl's hand. After a moment of hallucination, she weakly opened her eyes and turned her head toward the nervous and anxious girl in front of her with a look of pity. No. Don't go near those brothers, or your fate will be sealed. Unlucky. And your tribe. As she spoke haltingly, and the clock struck the hour, Cassandra, who had insisted she could only speak halfway through, lost all strength, closed her eyes listlessly, and let her hands fall limply to her sides. Madam. Kayla's expression changed drastically. I wrote several hundred more words. Please continue reading. The protagonist's second template is coming soon, and it will complement the first one. I'll try to update earlier in the future. Omega. Chapter 35. Aliens are also human. David showed no mercy, turning Sean, who had tried to attack him and even threatened to kill him, into a vegetable. Clark rushed forward in anger to save his brother, knocking Searle away and warming his heart. Besides, he couldn't help but feel a little angry. Looking at Sean, who was unconscious at the bottom of the pit, his voice was heavy and his tone hesitant. This time is different from the past. Sean may not have committed a crime yet, but you've already turned him into a vegetable. Previous users of the ability, including Jerome who can generate electricity, Grike who can transform into an insectoid, and Tina who can deform flesh and strengthen bones, have all been confirmed to have committed serious crimes such as murder. Sean, on the other hand, may have just gained his powers and come to seek revenge on David. Wasn't his attack on you and me a crime? Upon hearing this, David feigned surprise. Given his dangerous abilities, putting everything else aside, shouldn't I be ruled in court for self-defense? He patted Clark on the shoulder, who was taken aback, and turned to leave. Don't feel inferior, my brother. Aliens are people too. David wasn't surprised, it's the same in the comics. Superman's classic tendency to not see himself as human might mean that it's like someone trying to kill another person with a straw. It doesn't constitute murder intent. If he hasn't committed any other crimes and is attacked alone, he won't pay much attention. But now they're trying to apply this criminal view to him too. Is being powerful a crime? Are people with superpowers not human? With things having come to this, Clark thought for a moment, gritted his teeth, and with a burst of speed cleaned up the surrounding traces. He then took Sean to the hospital entrance and followed his brother. Page 40. When he first saw David do this, he was shocked and incredulous, but now, he has become terribly used to it. Back home, Clark was no longer so angry, because at the dinner table he heard on the radio that the town's power plant had been attacked by an unknown assailant who allegedly used liquid nitrogen as a weapon, and that more than a dozen people had frozen to death. Moreover, he knew the cause of the matter. David had helped Chloe drive away the womanizing Sean yesterday, which led to today's situation. At the dinner table, Jonathan and Martha worriedly reminded the two to be careful. This person may also be a special individual, it remains to be seen whether the police can bring the perpetrator to justice. The couple had no idea that the perpetrator of the crime was now in a vegetative state and lying in the hospital. Looking back, Clark felt that his brother's mentality was not so dangerous compared to those like Sean who immediately placed themselves above life and law and did whatever they wanted once they gained power. However, he still believes his younger brother needs to be corrected. It would be best if David didn't just beat people into a vegetative state. Clark didn't try to persuade his brother again, he had realized that his brother had his own set of values. The younger brother is usually smarter and more mature than his older brother, and in David's mind, his older brother's words probably don't carry much weight. Similar things have been said enough, there's no point in saying them again. Sometimes language is powerless, it is difficult to change a person simply through words. Regardless of whether Ms. Cassandra's predictions about the future were wrong, he could not let David go astray. This is the duty he, as the older brother, should fulfill. This time I was careless. Clark made a silent vow that next time, he would definitely take action to stop David. It's impossible that next time, the older brother will be in trouble and in such a sorry state that he needs his younger brother to solve his problems. Metropolitan Museum of Art downtown. A unique antique exhibition. Many tourists, dressed in suits and long skirts, strolled leisurely through the exhibition halls, holding complimentary champagne, admiring the precious collections from all over the world that had just arrived at the museum. Standing before a piece of ancient Greek armor in a glass case, Clark gazed at the glass, a hint of sadness on his face, reflecting on the events of the afternoon. Just 2 hours later, when we went back to the nursing home, Ms. Cassandra had already passed away. He was very grateful to the old man for helping him foresee the future. He originally planned to go to the nursing home in the afternoon to spend more time with the elderly, but when he went back, the room was empty. All of Cassandra's personal belongings were taken away. I learned from a caregiver whose eyes were red that the old man had passed away at noon. She helped many people in the nursing home, gave them life advice, helped them solve their problems, and saddened them when they passed away. The only consolation is that she did not die from her illness. David shook his head slightly. That kind old woman may have foreseen her death and passed away peacefully. There's no need to be too sad for that lady who has seen through the ways of life. Afternoon, when the two went to the nursing home, they ran into Lana, who had just returned from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Her aunt had given her some exhibition tickets. Lana recalled the trouble she had caused a couple of days ago and Clark's comfort to her, and gave each of them a ticket. Clark was delighted to have the opportunity to meet Leonardo that evening, but he didn't expect what happened that afternoon. I know. Clark nodded silently for a moment, took a deep breath, and said, "Life has to go on." He looked up and noticed the dazzling armor in the display case, studded with gems, and stared at it with a hint of curiosity. This inner armor is inlaid with large gemstones, alternating between blue and red, making it look extremely luxurious and priceless. I don't know if they are real or fake. I heard that some of the precious, unique items in the museum were previously exhibited using high-quality replicas because of accidents. Clark, who grew up on a farm, was not quite used to this kind of occasion and asked his younger brother in a slightly reserved voice. You can take a closer look with your own eyes. Template integration rate, 95%. David casually replied that he wasn't an expert in ancient Greek identification either. The Thanos template will be fully integrated soon. He hasn't been checking the mood alerts much these past few days, and has been hiding the notifications. The resentment and hatred from several people in a vegetative state kept flooding in, which was quite an eyesore. As long as he knows that his emotional state is constantly increasing, that's fine. Clark's resolute stance plus 38. Clark's strength seems to have grown rapidly recently. David reviewed the previous notifications and found that Clark had almost doubled the ability points he had provided in the past few days. Even the less intense emotions provide a considerable amount of emotional impact. Kyra's tension plus 0.07. He caught sight of an interesting name, and a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. When did Kayla become nervous because of him? Did she encounter him during the day? Clark, David, it's great to see you here. Luther, dressed in a black suit, slowly walked over, carrying glasses of champagne with lemon garnishes on the sides, a smile on his face. Would you like me to introduce you to the collection here? Luther. Clark smiled and greeted him. Genuine ancient Greek artifacts, which once belonged to Alexander the Great. Earlier, Clark was looking curiously at the display case when Luther pointed to the python-like pattern on the chest of the armor. I've heard that this design represents courage and strength. Courage and strength. David looked up and saw that the python's coiled shape did resemble an S, and he let out a soft laugh. Alexander's soldiers would probably not agree with this and could not imagine anyone wearing it on the battlefield. Its entire body is inlaid with dazzling, glittering gems, visible from miles away. This is definitely not a suit of armor. If you're not going to be wearing battle armor, what's the point of talking about strength and courage? Don't you think that's ridiculous? Sometimes, the enemy is not on the battlefield filled with blood and death. Luther laughed. This suit of armor was used to help Alexander the Great appear sacred and inviolable on certain occasions. Lex, are you a history buff? Clark was surprised that the descendant of an entrepreneur was so knowledgeable about history. I'm only interested in people who dominate the world before they turn 30. Luther's nonchalant conversation revealed an undisguised ambition and arrogance. David lifted his eyelids slightly. If I remember correctly, Alexander died at the age of 33. More than an hour later, there will be another chapter. I'd like to recommend a friend's book. It's light and easy to read, written with skillful prose, and simplifies the cultivation genre. It's very well written, and interested readers can bookmark it and take a look. Chapter 36, Clark's Abilities Discovered. Luther's smile froze slightly, and Clark patted him on the shoulder to ease the awkwardness. Lex, life doesn't have to be about dominating the world to have meaning. In the distance, Clark caught sight of Lana's slender figure. A smile involuntarily appeared on his face, and he was about to step forward to greet her. Another familiar figure appeared. Lana was accompanied by Whitney. The daytime football practice had ended, and Whitney, having heard that Lana would be there, got a ticket and decided to continue following Lana, hoping to reconcile with his ex-girlfriend. Seeing that the two seemed to have eased their tensions and were chatting from time to time, Clark's face darkened.